Chapter 669. The room was very quiet. Jean Hausa and her eyes met, and they both saw their own shadows in each other's eyes. Shi Mengwan's face was pale, and her expression was haggard. Her lips were slightly swollen. Her eyes were filled with unwillingness, anger and conflict as she stared at him in pain. Jean Hausa slightly missed her gaze and didn't look at her. His silence in Shi Mengwan's eyes meant that he didn't want to let her go. She couldn't help but reach out and grab the front of his clothes. "Tell me, Jean Hausa, what do you want to do for you to let me go?" It had only been a few days, but she felt mentally and physically exhausted. She had always been weak in front of him, and she had never been able to be tough. She hated herself for being like this, but she couldn't control herself. As long as she met him, as long as she encountered something related to him, she would become different from herself. She had clearly made up her mind to get rid of him. She had clearly thought that she had made it clear to him. But what was he doing now? There was still a wound on her lips. He had bitten her a few days ago. He had forgotten to control his strength when he had lost control, and her injury hadn't healed yet. He raised his hand and gently caressed her lips. His movements were very light, but Shi Mengwan slapped his hand away. "Jean Hausa, answer me. What do you want to do for you to let me go? Tell me, tell me." She was really angry. She didn't care about her exhausted body, and kept pounding on his chest. To him, that kind of strength was almost like a cat's paw scratching an itch. Before Shi Mengwan could react, he picked her up and put her on the bed. "Jean Hausa." Shi Mengwan's voice was about to turn hoarse. She didn't have any more strength to resist Jean Hausa. She was angry, so she simply closed her eyes and let him be. He could do whatever he wanted. If he didn't want to let her go, what could she do? Jean Hausa found some clothes, picked her up, and put them on for her. Then he carried her to the bathroom. Her feet indeed didn't have any strength at all. Jean Hausa supported her and let her lean against his chest. He squeezed the toothpaste for her. Putting the toothbrush in her hand, Shi Mengwan looked at Jean Hausa in the mirror. She took the toothbrush and brushed her teeth as if she was venting her anger. She used so much force that her gums were bleeding. Jean Hausa frowned and gently grabbed her hand. Shi Mengwan stopped for a moment. She looked at Jean Hausa's face in the mirror, and he was also looking at her. In the end, she was defeated. She loosened her grip a little and brushed her teeth carelessly, then rinsed her mouth. She wanted to say something, but Jean Hausa picked her up again. This time, he carried her to the dining room outside. There were many small plates on the dining table, filling it to the brim. There were barbecued pork buns, egg tarts, shrimp dumplings, steamed shumai, beef tripe, beef meatballs, salt and pepper duck chin, steamed chicken feet with black bean sauce, spring rolls, fried dough sticks, and steamed buns. There were 2 cups of soy milk, and 2 bowls of shrimp porridge on the side. Shi Mengwan looked at Jean Hausa. He put her down and pushed one of the bowls of shrimp porridge in front of her. "You." Shi Mengwan didn't know what to say. She saw the marks on these butterflies. This was a very famous Hong Kong-style tea restaurant nearby. That restaurant's business was very good, and because business was so good, it never delivered takeout. And with so many, don't tell her that Jean Hausa brought it back himself. "Eat." Jean Hausa's voice was indifferent. Shi Mengwan didn't have a chance to speak even if she wanted to. She looked at the bowl of steaming porridge and didn't move for a long time. "Do you want me to feed you?" Jean Hausa's long and narrow eyes raised slightly. Shi Mengwan shrunk her neck. Her mind thought of some of the discordant scenes of the past few days. She didn't dare to let him feed her. She picked up the bowl of porridge and found that such a simple action made her hands a little sore. She couldn't help but glare at Jean Hausa again. Before he noticed, she looked away. The porridge tasted good. She had been to this tea restaurant with Su Qingsang before. At that time, she felt that it would be great if the other party was willing to deliver takeout every day. That way, she wouldn't have to wait in line. She could order takeout earlier and eat before going to work. However, the people inside said that because business was too good, even if there was takeout, it wouldn't be delivered, so there wasn't any. Now that she looked at the table full of breakfast, she didn't know how Jean Hausa did it. She didn't have a big appetite, but she hadn't eaten well for the past few days. For 3 days in a row she ate takeout. It was the new year, and many shops were on holiday. She didn't have much choice. Zhang Haoze was tormenting her again, and she was really hungry. Shi Mingwan, who had eaten more than usual, put down the bowl and looked at Zhang Haoze in front of her. She couldn't understand him more and more now. Zhang Haoze didn't eat slowly, but he didn't look rough. He took a big bite, but he chewed slowly. His behavior could even be considered elegant. She thought of what Xiao Qi had said before. He said that Zhang Haoze had founded several companies over the years and had done a lot of things. She had always known that he was an ambitious man, but his achievements today still made her feel a little surprised and shocked. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed very normal. She remembered that he had nothing back then, but he could always conjure something at the critical moment. For example, money, food. For example, the expenses that the two of them needed. She remembered that time when she changed his clothes. His coat was too thick, and she couldn't do anything about it. In the end, she could only sew the sleeves a little shorter, so that she could wear it as a thick coat. However, because it was too thick, she accidentally pricked her hand. Xiao Zhe, who didn't notice what she was doing, snatched the clothes from her hand in the next second, as well as the needle and thread. The youth put her index finger into his mouth. Shi Mingwan looked at his handsome face and felt a little embarrassed. "I'm fine." She said that, but the youth didn't let go of her. His gaze was fervent, and there seemed to be flames in it. Unfortunately, Shi Mingwan was too young at that time, so she didn't understand at all. The youth let go of her, but didn't let her touch the needle and thread again. Shi Mingwan thought to herself, how could she not touch it? Their lives weren't very good now. Although his clothes weren't completely suitable for her to wear after he changed them, and they were even a little ugly. But wasn't it enough to keep out the cold? Her thoughts at that time were that simple. She thought that after Xiao Zhe left home, she would continue when he wasn't around. The youth brought back 2 sets of brand new clothes the next day. Not only did the youth bring her clothes, but he also brought matching shoes and hair accessories. There were 3 or 4 sets of clothes inside and outside. Although they weren't branded, she wasn't ignorant at that time. She knew that these clothes weren't cheap. Where did you get them? At that time, the youth held her hand and told her, "Wan, trust me. I won't let you suffer." Shi Mingwan didn't know that it was a promise. She blinked her eyes. She naturally believed the youth's words. "Dear brother, Wan, as long as you follow me, I won't let you suffer." Give him time, he would definitely let her live a good life. That was the youth's promise. Although he was young and immature, he was extremely serious. The chair beside Shi Mingwan was pulled away by someone. She was shocked. When she came back to her senses, she realized that Zhang Haoze had already finished eating. He had actually taken care of so many things. Once again, he picked her up and placed her on his lap. "What were you thinking about just now?" he asked. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and couldn't answer Zhang Haoze's question. Zhang Haoze turned her body around and looked her in the eye. His eyes were dark, and Shi Mingwan couldn't help but think of the youth from back then. It was also the same eyes, and it was also the same serious and solemn expression. But what he did was the complete opposite of what Zhang Haoze did. Zhang Haoze pinched her chin again, and his brows were tightly knitted. He seemed to be very dissatisfied with the fact that she was always distracted by his side. This time, Shi Mingwan didn't grab his hand. She even bravely raised her head to look at him. "Zhang Haoze, I'm thinking about you." She held his cheek with her hand and stared at his face. "I'm thinking about you." Seeing his slightly furrowed brows, she reached out her hand and gently smoothed it. "I'm thinking, why do you want me? I'm thinking, what do you mean? I'm thinking, what do I have to do for you to let me go?" Meeting Zhang Haoze's eyes, which had become even deeper, she gently raised the corners of her lips. "Zhang Haoze, can you tell me?" She had already said it several times today, but he hadn't given her an answer even once. Zhang Haoze loosened his grip on her chin and pulled her hand away. However, he didn't answer her question. "Zhang Haoze." Shi Mingwan held his face again. This time, her gaze was very serious. "In your heart, am I a prostitute?" Zhang Haoze's expression suddenly became quite ugly. "Shi Mingwan, if you don't treat me like a prostitute, then why are you treating me like this?" Shi Mingwan really couldn't understand. The dear brother she liked, admired, and had always been thinking about shouldn't be like this. She stared at him, stubbornly wanting an answer. Although the home clothes she was wearing were thick, they were designed with a large round collar. She held his face like this, and her hands moved forward, so that her neckline could be seen clearly in front of him. The green and purple marks on it were all left by him. It also reminded him of how crazy they had been these few days. Jean Hauser felt his body stiffen, but he knew that the other party couldn't take any more. His gaze shifted to the side again. Jean Hauser. He wanted to avoid it, but Shi Mingwan didn't give him a chance to avoid it. Xiaoqi is a blind date arranged by my parents. I'm 26 this year. Perhaps I'm not considered old among the unmarried girls in Lin City, but in our town, many girls of my age are already married and have children. She wasn't someone who followed the crowd, nor was she someone who followed the crowd. She said so much today because that person was Jean Hauser. How other people's lives are has nothing to do with me, but I can't ignore my parents' thoughts. If you don't treat me like a prostitute, then can I treat it as if you also have feelings for me? At least, you like me a little and care a little, don't you? As long as he had feelings for her, she could wait and persevere. Jean Hauser's face was turned straight by her again, and he looked at her. Her eyes were fervent, and the light in them made the room lose its color. Compared to him, she was undoubtedly brave. At least in terms of feelings, she was much braver than him. The air was silent, and Jean Hauser was silent. Shi Mingwan's eyes darkened, and she retracted her hand. Jean Hauser, you can go. No matter how much she loved him, she wouldn't lose her dignity and rationality. She wouldn't lower herself to this extent. She retreated a little, and her gaze was cold. She was about to get up and leave, but Jean Hauser reached out and hugged her before she could leave. He wrapped his arms around her tightly and hugged her tightly. Jean Hauser. Shi Mingwan heard his heartbeat. Her voice was very hoarse, but the words she spat out were quite clear. Don't be like this. Jean Hauser didn't let go. He grabbed her waist tightly and pressed his chin against her neck. His body was a little stiff, as if he was enduring it. Jean Hauser, let go of me. She didn't struggle. She no longer had any strength. In 3 days, she had almost exhausted all of her strength. Shi Mingwan. That person finally spoke. His voice was a little hoarse. He called her name. He pressed her face tightly against his chest. When he spoke, she could even hear the vibration of his chest. Give me some time. Shi Mingwan looked up at him. His pitch-black eyes were also looking at her at this moment. She couldn't understand the emotions in them. Give you time? What time? The time to marry me? Shi Mingwan's tone was a little mocking. She didn't believe Jean Hauser's words. Jean Hauser stared at her face and actually nodded. Shi Mingwan looked at him. For a moment, she couldn't tell what she felt. Jean Hauser. Give me time, Jean Hauser said again. Shi Mingwan lowered her eyes. She heard the sound of her heart beating. It was the desire in the depths of her heart. She really wanted to marry her dear brother and spend the rest of her life with him. The anticipation in the depths of her heart made her not even have time to think about more realistic problems. You really? If she didn't like him, she naturally wouldn't be so worried about gains and losses. But if she liked him and fell in love with him, there was nothing she could do. It was impossible for her to act according to her own subjective will. Jean Hauser looked at her and nodded. Shi Mingwan was very excited. But the more excited she was, the calmer she appeared. She just stared at Jean Hauser. And he was also looking at her. Shi Mingwan blinked and tried to calm herself down. How long? Seeing that Jean Hauser didn't say anything, he only frowned slightly, as if he was in a difficult position. Shi Mingwan smiled bitterly. You can't make me wait forever, can you? She didn't believe in the saying that a woman's youth was limited. But she had her own problems right now. She couldn't ignore Grandma Shi's 2-year period. Looking at Grandma Shi's body, it wouldn't be a problem for her to live to 100 years old. At that time, if she didn't bring a man back, what would happen to Grandma Shi? Jean Hauser, tell me, how long do you want me to wait for you? There was silence. Jean Hauser's thin lips pursed into a straight line. He looked like he was in a difficult position. Shi Mingwan felt that she couldn't continue the conversation. She thought that she had already done everything a girl could do. What else did Jean Hauser want? Jean Hauser. She forcefully got up from his arms and took a big step back. Her feet were still a little soft. Such a simple action made her feel uncomfortable in the place that she couldn't tell others about. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to ignore the feeling in her body. You can go. Jean Hauser held her hand before she wanted to go back to her room. It won't be long. It won't be long? Sure, Mingwan really wanted to ask him, how long would it be? But she couldn't ask. She looked at Jean Hauser. His eyes were like a deep spring. She was deeply immersed in them. She was once again pulled into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her gently. He wasn't as rough as he had been these few days, nor was he as overbearing as before. He kissed her gently, bit by bit, and he carefully traced the shape of her lips. The strong Jean Hauser would make it impossible for Shi Mingwan to refuse, but such a gentle Jean Hauser made Shi Mingwan confused. She slowly closed her eyes and allowed herself to be intoxicated by his kiss. He finally retreated a little when she was almost suffocated. He pressed his forehead against hers. His breathing was also a little heavy and a little breathless. Give me some time. His voice was slightly hoarse as he uttered those words in an extremely soft voice. Shi Mingwan looked into his eyes and finally nodded weakly. Her body was carried by him again. But he didn't go to the room. Instead, he went to the living room. Do you want to watch a movie? Jean Hauser asked her. Shi Mingwan blinked at him. Although she didn't understand what he meant, she still nodded. She got up and chose a movie called Life is Beautiful. Shi Mingwan had seen this movie before, but it had been too long, so she had forgotten many of the plot. The film festival played very slowly, and she slowly recalled the plot along with the movie. Her eyes were a little red when she saw Guido take a very ridiculous step and die under the muzzle of Na Chui. Shi Mingwan's eyes fell. There was a tissue in front of her. She took it and wiped her tears away. She sniffed and found that Jean Hauser was staring at her. She suddenly didn't want him to see her like this. She turned her face and continued to focus on the plot. The movie ended very quickly, but her emotions didn't come out of that kind of environment. Her body was turned around by Jean Hauser. He raised his hand, as if he couldn't understand the change in her emotions. Why are you crying? Don't you feel touched? Jean Hauser looked at her expressionlessly and didn't say anything. There was no need to say anything to know that he probably didn't feel anything at all. If you're not touched, why did you say you wanted to watch a movie? Jean Hauser turned his gaze away and picked up the remote control to watch another movie. Shi Mingwan seemed to have realized something. You didn't say you wanted to watch a movie because Xiaoqi asked me to watch a movie yesterday, did you? Jean Hauser turned around and glared at her. Soon he looked at the screen again. However, Shi Mingwan clearly saw that his earlobes were slowly turning red. This realization stunned her for a moment. She bit her lip. For a moment, she thought that there was something wrong with her eyes. Are you jealous of Xiaoqi? Shi Mingwan asked subconsciously. In the next second, she saw that Jean Hauser's earlobes were even redder. At this moment, Jean Hauser turned around and glared at her. His gaze looked very fierce. Shi Mingwan seemed to have discovered something extraordinary. She still wanted to say something. However, Jean Hauser kissed her lips. It was a kiss that was rougher than before, not giving her a chance to speak. Shi Mingwan blinked her eyes. There was a faint smile in her bright and beautiful eyes. They were extremely bright, like stars in the sky. However, Jean Hauser raised his hand to cover her eyes and deepened the kiss. Bit by bit, his lips stole her breath and occupied it. His hands also started to be dishonest. Shi Mingwan wanted to get rid of his hand, but he pushed her down on the sofa and covered her eyes with the silk towel she had used before. When her eyes couldn't see, her senses would become especially sharp. The weather was still cold. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. Not here. The man seemed to want to punish her for mocking him just now. Not only did he not let go of her, but he also firmed his determination to do it here. She couldn't resist, so she could only dance with him. At night, Shi Mingwan, who was sleeping on the bed, righteously rejected Jean Hauser and didn't let him continue. She had really been tortured by him too much these few days. If he continued, her waist would definitely break. Jean Hauser stared at her face for a long time, but in the end he really didn't continue. He hugged her waist and pressed his chin against the top of her hair. The lights in the room had already been turned off, leaving only a bedside lamp. Shi Mingwan's back was facing Zhang Haoze. She looked at the small lamp, and her voice was very soft. Zhang Haoze? He didn't respond. But Shi Mingwan knew that he wasn't asleep. Don't you need to go to work? It was already past the 7th day of the Chinese New Year. Normally speaking, many companies would have already started work. No need. Because he was lying down, his voice sounded a little hoarse, but it was especially sexy. You. Shi Mingwan thought of what Xiaoqi said. You're starting a company now? Yes. Pretty good. She still remembered the young man who had nothing more than 10 years ago. At that time, he said that he had to earn a lot of money, and that he would give her a good life. Does your company make money? Yes. That's good. Shi Mingwan nodded gently. At this moment, he turned her body around and let her face him. She looked up at him. Can you tell me about you? She wanted to know more about him, such as where he had been all these years, and what else he had done other than starting a company. Didn't he have no home or parents? Then how did he go to university? She had a lot of questions to ask, but Zhang Haoze pressed her face against his chest. Sleep. Zhang Haoze. If you don't sleep, I'll do something to make you want to sleep. Shi Mingwan's face was a little red, so she really didn't ask. If he didn't want to tell her, she wouldn't ask. When he wanted to tell her, she would ask. She sighed slightly in her heart. She didn't open her eyes. Instead, she rubbed her face against his chest. Zhang Haoze? Yes. 2 years. What? I'll wait for you for 2 years. Shi Mingwan's voice was very soft. She already wanted to sleep. These few days, she really didn't have much time to sleep. She didn't hear Zhang Haoze's response, and she didn't need his response. If you can't marry me in 2 years, I'll find a random man to marry, she said. Zhang Haoze stared at her face, but she seemed to be completely asleep and didn't make a sound. After a long time, her steady breathing could be heard, confirming that she had really fallen asleep. 2 years. Chapter 670. Shi Mingwan, who had slept well the night before, was in good spirits when she woke up in the morning. She decided to visit Xiang Kaiping today. She had been with Zhang Haoze for the past few days and hadn't gone out. When she woke up in the morning, breakfast was already on the dining table. Zhang Haoze was in charge of Shi Mingwan's 3 meals these days. She knew that he didn't buy it, but she felt the same in her heart. The rebellious young man only knew to wait for her to prepare breakfast and wake him up to eat. Zhang Haoze was outside the balcony, seemingly answering a phone call. She couldn't hear what he was saying. She wanted to go over and ask, but Zhang Haoze had already hung up. Shi Mingwan looked at his suit and leather shoes. This suit didn't seem to be left with her before. She knew that he woke up very early every day. Did someone send it to him? Are you going out today? To work. Zhang Haoze sat down at the dining table. That word could be considered an explanation. Shi Mingwan sat down opposite him. She looked at his expression and thought of something. Then will you come back tonight? Zhang Haoze's hand that was picking up the chopsticks paused for a moment. He glanced at her then nodded. Yes. Shi Mingwan didn't even notice that her eyes lit up because of Zhang Haoze's word. Then you should be early. I have nothing to do today anyway. I'll go buy ingredients to make dumplings in the afternoon. After dinner, Zhang Haoze went to work. Shi Mingwan looked at the empty room, and for the first time, a real smile appeared on her face. Now let's leave it like this for now. This is also good. She cleaned up the dishes and went to the bathroom to get Zhang Haoze's clothes, intending to wash them. However, when she saw his clothes, she realized that Zhang Haoze's clothes needed to be dry cleaned. She washed her own clothes and tidied up the house. Shi Mingwan carried Zhang Haoze's clothes downstairs and went to a nearby dry cleaner to wash the 2 sets of clothes that Zhang Haoze had left there. Then, she went to the hospital to accompany Xiang Kaiping for a while. After the 7th day, Su Qingsang had already started work. The hospital she stayed in was the largest hospital in Lin City, so Su Qingsang was very busy. Shi Mingwan didn't expect that Xiang Kaiping would actually want to introduce her. She found a good doctor in the hospital. Speaking of which, Shi Mingwan had seen that man before. He used to pursue Su Qingsang. Although Su Qingsang didn't know anything about it, as a bystander, how could Shi Mingwan not know that the person Zhua Hongchen liked was Su Qingsang? She was so frightened by Xiang Kaiping that she even refused to have lunch with Xiang Kaiping. She was afraid that if she stayed any longer, Xiang Kaiping would ask Su Qingsang to bring them over. That would be really embarrassing for her. After leaving the hospital, she received a call from Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang couldn't stop laughing. "Don't worry, my mother just said it casually. She was too bored staying in the hospital." "I know, but your mother is really too passionate. I can't take it anymore." He was so concerned about her personal problems that she was under a lot of pressure. "It's better if you can't take it," Su Qingsang said half jokingly and half seriously. "Maybe you'll really meet your true love." Qingsang. "All right. I won't tease you anymore." Su Qingsang had always known about the knot in her heart. "But I really think that you should stop waiting for that big brother of yours. It's been so long. He's too unreliable." Qingsang. Sure, Mengwan wanted to say that it wasn't unreliable at all. She had already met him now, and they were very close. But Su Qingsang wouldn't believe that. She was also too embarrassed to say it. "All right, I'm just saying. You still have to rely on yourself." Su Qingsang had tried to persuade her many times, but she had stopped a long time ago. It was just a casual mention. After hanging up the phone, Sure Mengwan was a little lost in thought. Unreliable? Thinking about it seriously, it was true. Jean Hauser didn't say that he wanted to marry her, and he didn't confirm her identity. Now that they were like this, it felt a little shameful to talk about it. After all, Jean Hauser didn't seem to be willing to reveal her identity now. She really looked like she was going to throw herself at him. What she said before she fell asleep yesterday was true. 2 years. She gave Jean Hauser 2 years. And she also gave herself 2 years. In 2 years, if she couldn't move Jean Hauser to marry her, then she would give up. But before that, she always wanted to give herself a chance. She had waited for more than 10 years and searched for more than 10 years. When she thought there was no hope, she found it and met it. No matter what the final way out for her and Jean Hauser was, whether it was a calamity or fate, she would accept it. At least, she didn't want to regret her youth. She looked at the blue sky above her head. The weather was really good, and she was actually in a good mood. No matter what, she had waited for her dear brother. This result was already very good for her. There were some things that she wouldn't regret as long as she tried her best. Chen Feifei sat in Jean Hauser's office. She looked at Jean Hauser's position with unfriendly eyes. She had been waiting for Jean Hauser for half an hour. But Jean Hauser still hadn't appeared. She stood up and walked outside, looking at Lo Xian, who was sitting outside. "Where did Jean Hauser go? Don't tell me you don't know." "Miss Chen, I really don't know." "You don't know?" Chen Feifei sneered. "If you don't know, then how did you become a secretary?" Lo Xian stood there and bent down to listen to Chen Feifei's temper. That attitude made Chen Feifei even angrier. She stood up and pointed at Lo Xian. "Tell me, where did Jean Hauser go?" Lo Xian had seen Chen Feifei's appearance in front of Jean Hauser. She was like a completely different person. He lowered his back and looked very respectful. "Miss Chen, although President Jean is my boss, he really doesn't need to report everything to me. So it's normal that I don't know where he went." Chen Feifei stood up and stomped her feet angrily. She turned around and went to Chen Yongchang's office. Chen Yongchang had just returned from a meeting. As soon as he entered the office, he saw his beloved daughter looking unhappy. "What's wrong? Who made our baby angry? Who else?" Chen Feifei stood up. "Or is it Jean Hauser? He hasn't been home for days." As she spoke, she went forward and hooked Chen Feifei's hand. "Dad, what kind of work did you give Brother Hao? Look, it's not even the 15th yet, and he's already so busy." Chen Yongchang looked at Chen Feifei with a complicated gaze. He only said for a moment, "Don't be too willful. You know that I've arranged work for Hauser. When he's done, he'll naturally come back." "Dad, I just want him to accompany me. You're not allowed to arrange any more work for him. Look at you. I've really spoiled you." After Chen Yongchang finished speaking, he patted her hand. "Don't forget that Hauser is not only in charge of our company's business, but also his own company's business. Speaking of this, I'm even angrier." Chen Feifei pouted. "Isn't our family's company big? Brother Hao still wants to open a company outside. You shouldn't have agreed to let Brother How open a company outside? Chen Yongchang glared at Chen Feifei. Jean Hauze is talented. Even if I don't agree with his ability, do you think he won't open a company outside? Back then, Jean Hauze had only just graduated from high school, and he had already asked him to borrow money to invest in a fund. At first, he was unwilling, but he didn't expect that he had misjudged him. Jean Hauze actually had that kind of ability. In one summer vacation, he had earned his first $1,000,000. Later, his wealth had increased by leaps and bounds in the past few years. If it weren't for the fact that the Chen family still owed Jean Hauze a debt of gratitude, he felt that Jean Hauze might really have left the Chen family. Dad. Besides, Dad is doing it for you. A hint of calculation flashed across Chen Yongchang's eyes, but it appeared so quickly that Chen Feifei didn't see it. Do you know how much Jean Hauze's technology company is worth now? Do you know how much the website he invested in is worth now? All of this will be yours in the future. Chen Feifei bit her lip and looked at Chen Yongchang worriedly. Dad, I don't want any company. I just want brother Hao to accompany me. Nonsense. Chen Yongchang glared at his daughter and realized that his attitude was too harsh. In the end, he softened his tone. Feifei, let me tell you, Jean Hauze is too scheming. I'm just afraid that you'll suffer a loss. Then why don't you ask brother Hao to marry me as soon as possible? Look, a grown girl can't be kept at home. Do you really want to get married as soon as possible? Don't you want to accompany Dad for a few more years? Dad, if I marry brother Hao, he'll still live at home in the future. Not only can I accompany you, but you'll also have a son. You. Chen Yongchang smiled. All right, you can go. Leave this matter to Dad. Don't worry. I'll definitely get your brother Hao to marry you. Dad is the best. Chen Feifei kissed Chen Yongchang on the face before turning around and leaving. After she left, Chen Yongchang called his secretary, Little Wang. Secretary Wang, check where Jean Hauze has been these few days. Yes. Secretary Wang left. Chen Yongchang thought about his plan and picked up the phone to dial another number. Before Shi Mengwan bought it home, she really went to buy the ingredients to make dumplings. When she returned home, Jean Hauze hadn't returned yet. She went into the kitchen, put everything away and tidied up. The dumpling skin was ready-made and sold. She just needed to mix the stuffing. It wasn't too difficult for her. After washing the vegetables and chopping the stuffing, she couldn't help but think of her dear brother again. That year they spent the new year together. That was their first year together. The winter in Lin City was especially cold, but it didn't snow. Near the bungalow Shi Mengwan and the others lived in, there was a young couple from the north. The two of them couldn't go home for the new year, so they started to prepare for the new year early. Shi Mengwan happened to pass by and saw it, so she felt that she should also prepare. Dear brother, can we also make dumplings for the new year? Make dumplings. The young man who returned home took off his coat. When he heard this, he frowned. You know how to? A little. Shi Mengwan nodded. I saw my mother make dumplings before and helped. However, I didn't do it myself. It's too troublesome. Don't do it. It's the new year. Everyone eats dumplings. Eating dumplings makes it more festive. Let's go. How about we go buy the ingredients? The young man couldn't win against Shi Mengwan, so he followed her to pick the ingredients. When Shi Mengwan really wanted to do it, she realized that it wasn't as easy as she thought. Usually, it was very easy to see her mother do this, but now that she bought the ingredients herself, she realized that it was very difficult. The stuffing was fine. She learned to mix it, and it would be fine. It was either a little salty or a little bland. However, the dumpling skin made Shi Mengwan a little difficult. In the past, it was Shi Mengwan's mother who mixed the dough at home, and she helped her. However, it was her first time rolling the dough skin herself. When she really kneaded the dough skin into a ball, she realized that it was very difficult to roll the dough skin into thin slices. She tried several dumpling skins, but they all failed. They were either too thin or too thick. The young man crossed his arms in front of his chest and looked at her movements. He sneered. Are you sure you can? The young girl was very embarrassed. She had never been so embarrassed before. I'll try again. I'll definitely be able to do it. The young man looked at her mockingly. Forget it. If you don't know how, We'll eat something else today. No, I definitely will. Sure, Mengwan was very stubborn. Today was New Year's Eve. Wasn't New Year's Eve supposed to be eaten with dumplings? However, Sure Mengwan tried again. But the result was actually too thin. It actually broke. Her face was red. I don't believe I won't succeed. She was a very stubborn person. She stubbornly decided that she had to succeed. He picked up another ball of dough and tried again. This time he didn't know why, but he actually pressed down on his hand. The young man looked at her actions and reached out to take the rolling pin in her hand. Let me do it. Sure Mengwan looked at the young man. She couldn't believe that he actually knew how to roll dumpling skins. Are you joking? Let me do it. I'll just try a few more times. The young man didn't even raise his head. He picked up the small ball of dough and pressed it with his palm. Then, he copied Sure Mengwan's actions and started rolling it. The first one was too thick and failed. The second one was too thin and failed again. Sure Mengwan bit her lip. While she was still thinking about how to not hurt the young man's third dumpling skin was already done. Here, Sure Mengwan looked at the dumpling skin, and for a moment, she thought that there was something wrong with her eyes. Dear brother. She picked up the small dumpling skin. Have you rolled it before? No. The young man's hands didn't stop moving. He had mastered the trick, and his movements were fast and good. Sure Mengwan was speechless. The young man felt her gaze and raised his head slightly. What? Aren't you going to wrap it? Yes, I'll wrap it. Sure Mengwan felt that this was simply unfair. She picked up the very even piece of dumpling skin and looked at the young man's movements. How did you know? I knew it from watching you do it. Sure Mengwan's pretty face was full of dissatisfaction. I've also seen my mother do a lot. The young man glanced at her. You're short. Because she was short, she couldn't exert strength, or it wasn't easy for her to exert strength. Sure Mengwan almost choked on her own saliva. How am I short? Although she was 13 years old, she was already more than 1.5 meters tall. She wasn't considered short among her peers at all, okay? Her gaze fell on the young man, and she lowered her head dejectedly. Alright, compared to Xiao Zhe, she was indeed short. After the new year, Xiao Zhe had grown a lot taller. Now he was probably 1.8 meters tall. She was very depressed, but her hands didn't stop wrapping the dumplings. She didn't know how to roll dough, but she still knew how to make dumplings. After all, she had helped a lot at home in the past. Just like that, one of them rolled the dumpling skin, and the other made the dumpling skin. Unexpectedly, their movements were very fast. It was getting late, in this small house with nothing. The two young men and women wrapped the dumplings together. Halfway through, Sure Mengwan glanced at Xiao Zhe. Dear brother, do you have coins? Why do you want coins? Wrap them in dumplings. Whoever eats them later will be very lucky next year. The young man glanced at her with a hint of mockery in his eyes. Superstition? How is it superstition? Isn't it all like this? Sure Mengwan bit her lip, thought for a moment and shook her head. No. Coins are very dirty. Let's use peanuts. Previously, they had bought some snacks, including a bag of peanuts. Sure Mengwan ran over and peeled 2 peanuts. She took out the peanuts inside and wrapped them in 2 dumplings. She looked up at Xiao Zhe. Dear brother, I'll wrap 2. There are 2 peanuts in each. This is a pair. When the time comes, we'll each have a pair of peanuts. This way, our luck will be very good next year. The young man didn't think much of it, and his eyes were filled with disdain. Sure Mengwan was in high spirits. After wrapping them, she placed the 2 in the middle of the dumplings. I'll mess them up. When the time comes, it'll really depend on luck. She said it excitedly, as if she would be able to get 1 for each of them as she thought. After wrapping it, Sure Mengwan took the dumplings and put them into the pot. Big brother, wait a moment. There will be dumplings to eat soon. While cooking the dumplings, Sure Mengwan didn't forget to stir-fry 2 dishes. Usually, they wouldn't be so extravagant, but today was New Year's Eve. No matter what, they should at least have some New Year's atmosphere, right? The dumplings were cooked, and the dishes were served. The steaming hot dumplings made people feel much better. Big brother, have some dumplings. Sure Mengwan's dumplings were pretty good. Although they weren't as exquisite as the ones sold in restaurants, They were all very plump and well-proportioned. Xiaozhe glanced at her, picked up a dumpling, and took a bite. "How is it, big brother? How does it taste?" The young man glanced at her and nodded in affirmation. Then he lowered his head and continued eating. Shi Mingwan tasted one and felt that it was not bad. She laughed. "Dear brother, my skills are not bad. I think we can open a dumpling restaurant. I'll be in charge of making the dumplings, and you'll be in charge of rolling the dumpling wrappers. How about that?" The young man stopped eating the dumplings and looked up at her. "Didn't you say you wanted to be a fashion designer?" Shi Mingwan's expression was awkward for a moment. Then she said with a matter-of-fact expression, "Then we can open a dumpling restaurant first. After we earn money, we can go learn fashion design." The young man didn't say anything and just quietly ate the dumplings. "Dear brother, there's more inside. Eat more. It's the new year today." The young man was halfway through eating when he picked up a dumpling. He seemed to have bitten something hard and his movements froze. "What's wrong?" Shi Mingwan suddenly perked up. "You ate peanuts? That's great. Dear brother, your luck will definitely be very good in the future." Xiaozhe didn't believe this at all, but very quickly, he ate a second peanut. "Dear brother, you ate peanuts again? You're so lucky." Shi Mingwan's eyes were pure congratulations, without any reluctance. Xiaozhe was stunned for a moment, but he put the remaining peanut into Shi Mingwan's bowl. "Here, big brother, didn't you say that my luck would be good? I will share my good fortune with you." Shi Mingwan's eyes immediately turned red. "Dear brother, let's eat." The young man was a man of few words. Shi Mingwan lowered her head to eat, but tears fell without warning. Big drops of tears fell into the bowl. The youth was stunned for a moment. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and couldn't say anything. In this half a year, she could force herself not to miss home and her family. But today was New Year's Eve. At this time he couldn't help it. No matter how unreasonable her grandmother was, she still had her mother, father, and her younger sister, who was only a few months old. She had been away from home for a few months, and she didn't know how her sister was doing. She also didn't know if her parents would still think of sending her sister away after she left. She missed her mother even more. When she left home, her mother had just finished her confinement. She could still help her mother at home, but if she wasn't at home, who would help her mother with the housework? The more she thought about it, the sadder she felt. The more she thought about it, the more she missed her family. Tears would fall as if they were free. The youth rarely saw Shi Mingwan cry. Since the two of them knew each other, most of the time, Shi Mingwan was cheerful and sunny. It was rare for her to be like this. He looked at her and suddenly got up to get the bag of peanuts. He took out 2 peeled ones and placed them in Shi Mingwan's bowl. What good luck or bad luck? I think it's all the same. Shi Mingwan was still sad just now, but when she saw the youth's actions, she burst into laughter. "Dear brother, she didn't mean that. I don't want to eat lucky dumplings." She sniffled and didn't dare to face the youth's eyes. "I just miss home." She wiped the tears in her eyes and looked at John Hauser. "I miss my father, my mother, and my little sister." The youth looked at her a little dazed. His brows were tightly furrowed, as if he had thought of something. "If you really miss home, then go back." Shi Mingwan looked at him and suddenly shook her head. "No, I'm not going back." She missed home very much, but she couldn't go back. She was very afraid that if she went back, her parents would send her little sister away again. "Dear brother." Shi Mingwan wiped the tears in her eyes and looked at John Hauser. "What about you? It's the new year today. Don't you miss your parents?" The youth's expression could be considered gentle just now, but his face was suddenly stained with a layer of gloominess. At this moment, his eyes were filled with malice and malice. "My father and mother are both gone." This was the first time Shi Mingwan had heard John Hauser mention his parents after being together for so long. She was stunned. Looking at the indifference in the youth's eyes, she felt a stabbing pain in her heart. She suddenly reached out and hugged the youth. "It's okay, dear brother. From now on, I'll be your family." The youth didn't say anything. This was the first time Shi Mingwan took the initiative to hug him. He lowered his head to look at her. The young girl had just come out of the kitchen, and there was still the smell of smoke on her body. He really felt like a family member. He reached out to hug the young girl. The youth didn't say anything. Family? This feeling seemed pretty good. Chapter 671. Shi Mingwan had already made more than half of the dumplings. She was very quick at wrapping dumplings. Strangely, after so many years, she had never learned how to roll dumpling wrappers. He never would. At home, Mother Shi was the one who rolled the dough. She only needed to wrap it. She was afraid of trouble when she went out. Not to mention that there were ready-made dumpling skins for sale now. You're back? Dinner will be ready soon. The kitchen was very small, so Shi Mingwan made dumplings on the dining table. The stuffing was mixed in a large basin, and 2/3 of it had already been wrapped up. Jean Hauser stepped forward and watched Shi Mingwan's movements. She had a pair of extremely beautiful hands. Her fingers were slender and smooth. She wrapped the dumplings very quickly and looked very pleasing to the eye. Jean Hauser pulled out the chair in front of the dining table and sat there watching Shi Mingwan make dumplings. Shi Mingwan felt uncomfortable under his gaze, and her hands stopped moving for a moment. What happened? Seeing that Jean Hauser didn't speak, she pouted and said, "Will you? Do you need help?" "I won't." Those 3 words were spoken in a low voice. Shi Mingwan knew that he wouldn't, so she stopped looking at him. She quickly wrapped the dumplings and put them away. Then he went into the kitchen to boil water. When the water boiled, she found the cured meat and sausages that Mother Shi had asked her to bring to Lin City before she came back. She calculated the portions, cut them, and then stir-fried 2 dishes. When she took the dishes out of the pot, she found that Jean Hauser had been staring at her at the door. The corners of Shi Mingwan's lips curled up slightly. "Wait a minute, the dumplings will be ready soon." As she spoke, she handed one of the dishes to Jean Hauser. "Please take it out." Jean Hauser didn't expect her to ask him to serve the dishes. He stared at the dishes in her hand for a few seconds and finally reached out his hand. "There's also this." Shi Mingwan smiled and glanced at the processing table. Jean Hauser placed the dishes on the table outside. Shi Mingwan looked at the dumplings. They were ready to be cooked. She scooped out the dumplings and brought them to the dining table outside. "All right, bring 2 bowls over." Jean Hauser had already sat down. Because of Shi Mingwan's words, he glanced at her and finally got up to get the bowl. Shi Mingwan had a faint smile in her eyes. Some things required a sense of participation. This was her home. Jean Hauser was now her man. She had to let him feel a sense of participation. There were many things that required 2 people to do together in order to improve their relationship. She hoped that their relationship could be enhanced outside of the bed, not just in bed every time they had an exchange of feelings. Seeing Jean Hauser sit down with the bowl, Shi Mingwan put the dumplings into his bowl. "How about trying it?" Jean Hauser tasted one, looked up at her and nodded. Shi Mingwan's eyes turned red because of his reaction. However, this time, she controlled herself and didn't let herself lose her composure. She lowered her head and ate the dumplings quietly. "My mom made this. So is this." Actually, when she was with dear brother back then, Shi Mingwan had also thought of getting some New Year's goods. But at that time, she was really too young to know. She couldn't now either, but she could let him taste her mother's cooking. Shi Mingwan made a lot of dumplings. It's only half cooked. She put the rest in the freezer so that she could cook it the next time she wanted to eat it. And the food she cooked all went into Jean Hauser's stomach. She really couldn't help but sigh. His appetite was really good. After dinner, Shi Mingwan cleaned up the kitchen. When she came out, Jean Hauser pulled her to sit down on the sofa. His hand was on her waist, and he held her in his arms. Shi Mingwan felt a little uncomfortable. She was too full, and Jean Hauser's actions made her feel dangerous. "Jean Hauser, how about we go for a walk?" She grabbed his hand away. Shi Mingwan really didn't want to do such exercise right after dinner. It was too tiring. "We're too full tonight. We should go for a walk to digest our food, don't you think?" Jean Hauser's hand was still on her waist. Shi Mingwan wasn't confident that he would agree to her request. But no matter what, she had to give it a try. "Let's go. Go for a walk." Jean Hauser stood up. Shi Mingwan was happy. She went to get her coat. She had already gone out today, and her coat was hanging at the entrance. She took the keys and phone and put them in her pocket. She looked at John Hauze with shining eyes. After going downstairs, Shi Mingwan felt a little regretful. The sun was out during the day, and the temperature in Lin City was still okay. She could still tolerate it. But it was night now, and Lin City was near the sea. The wind was strong, and the temperature was low. A gust of wind blew over, and Shi Mingwan couldn't take it anymore. It's so cold. Why was it so cold? She seemed to have heard the weather forecast that it would cool down again. But she didn't expect it to be so cold. She reached out and rubbed her palms. Just as she was about to put her hand back into her pocket, John Hauze reached out to hold her hand and put her hand into his pocket. His hand was very big, and it tightly wrapped around hers. Shi Mingwan's mind flashed for a moment. Looking at John Hauze's deep profile, she bit her lip and couldn't help but feel a trace of joy in her heart. She knew that her dear brother was like this. She moved her face closer to John Hauze's arm and rubbed it. The smile on Shi Mingwan's face became brighter. John Hauze felt her movements and turned to look at her. He didn't say much, but the expression on his face became much gentler. The next day, it rained in Lin City. When John Hauze left the company, he received a call from Chen Yongchang, saying that something had happened to Chen Feifei. When John Hauze rushed back to the Chen family, the doctor had just left. Chen Feifei was lying on the bed with a pale face. Chen Yongchang stood at the side, his face full of concern. "Uncle." John Hauze looked at Chen Yongchang, and his gaze fell on Chen Feifei's face. "Is Feifei okay? She has an old illness. It's not like you don't know." Chen Yongchang glanced at John Hauze as he spoke. "You haven't come back for the past few days. Feifei misses you too much. She ran out to look for you. But you know the temperature dropped yesterday. Feifei's health isn't good, so when she was drenched in the rain, she got sick." John Hauze didn't say anything, but Chen Feifei, who was on the bed, glanced at her father. "Dad, don't blame Brother Hao. It's not like Brother Hao didn't come to see me on purpose. You know that Brother Hao is busy with work. Feifei you." Chen Yongchang looked at his daughter with a conflicted expression. He seemed to be helpless that his daughter always valued John Hauze more than him. "Hauze." Chen Yongchang looked at John Hauze. "Originally this wasn't your fault. But Feifei is very weak now, so you should accompany her." As he spoke, Chen Yongchang walked out. The room quieted down, leaving only John Hauze and Chen Feifei. After Chen Yongchang left, Chen Feifei reached out to pull John Hauze's hand. "Brother Hao, Dad is too worried about me. It has nothing to do with you. Please don't be angry." "I'm not angry." John Hauze wanted to pull his hand out, but Chen Feifei held it tightly. "Brother Hao, are you really not angry?" Her face was full of uneasiness at this time, as if she was really afraid that John Hauze would be angry. John Hauze pursed his lips into a straight line and shook his head gently. Chen Feifei was satisfied, and a gentle smile appeared on her face. But her hands were still holding his hand tightly. "Brother Hao, what have you been busy with these days? I miss you very much. When I call you, you always say that you have something to do. When I go to your company, I can't find you. Do you know how worried I am about you? There are a lot of things to do at the company." John Hauze looked at Chen Feifei and resisted the urge to pull his hand back. "No matter how busy the company is, you still have to take care of your health. Just look at me and you will understand. Ever since I was young, I have been a patient. Now that I have grown up, not only can I not help you, but I will also tire you out." "It's nothing." John Hauze's voice was very indifferent. His indifference didn't just start today. Ever since Chen Feifei saved John Hauze and brought him home, he had always been like this. However, the more John Hauze was like this, the more Chen Feifei couldn't stop herself. She always wanted to get John Hauze. "Brother Hao, you don't have to comfort me. I know that you have always thought of me as a burden, so you don't want to tell me anything about the company or the outside world. But Brother Hao, I really like you." Chen Feifei's eyes were fixed on John Hauze. She could clearly see that those eyes were all about him. "I know." Chen Feifei bit her lip. She was still a little hurt by John Hauze's reaction. "Brother Hao, what about you? Do you like me?" John Hauze frowned and looked at Chen Feifei as he withdrew his hand. "You're not in good health. Rest early, Brother Hao." Chen Feifei went to pull his hand again. She looked up at him with pleading eyes. Do you hate me? Don't think too much. It's nothing. Then why didn't you come back to accompany me? You said that you would take care of me. Feifei. This time, Jean Hauser didn't have a cold expression. In my heart, you're similar to my sister. But, alright, it's getting late. You should rest. Jean Hauser patted her shoulder and turned to leave. After he left, Chen Feifei's expression almost changed. Who wanted to be his sister? Who wanted to be his sister? She had always wanted to be his woman, not his sister. Chen Feifei looked at the bedside lamp at the head of the bed and swept the floor without hesitation. The room was very soundproof and covered with a thick carpet. No matter how loud the noise she made, no one would hear it. Not only did she smash the bedside lamp, but Chen Feifei also threw everything around her that could be smashed and thrown away. It wasn't until she was panting and exhausted that she called the servants to clean up the room. The servants of the Chen family were already used to Chen Feifei's outburst from time to time. They silently packed up the things and put in new ones. In a short period of time, even the carpet had been changed. The room was the same as before Jean Hauser came in. There was no trace of damage. Jean Hauser went downstairs and met Chen Yongchang. When he saw him, he waved. The two of them once again went to the Chen family's study room one after the other. Hauser, have you been busy recently? I'm fine. Jean Hauser's voice was indifferent and sounded very calm. You haven't been in the company for a few days, and the company's matters have been pushed back a lot. Look, I'm old now, and my energy can't keep up. In the future, you still have to spend more time on business. Yes, I understand. Speaking of which, I'm almost at the age to retire. Look, how about you take over the Chen Corporation? Jean Hauser lowered his eyes and his face was expressionless. I'm afraid that's not appropriate, right? There's nothing inappropriate about it. After you and Feifei get married, won't the Chen family be yours? Jean Hauser didn't reply, but Chen Yongchang sighed at this moment. Hauser, I also know that you're not willing to marry Feifei, but Feifei is my only daughter. She really likes you. I can't let her suffer. Uncle. I also know that all these years, you've only treated Feifei as your sister. There's no love between a man and a woman. But her health isn't good, and she's been spoiled by me. I won't be at ease handing her over to someone else. After thinking about it, only you are suitable. Seeing that Jean Hauser didn't say anything, the expression on Chen Yongchang's face became more and more pained. Hauser, you can't forget your roots. If our family hadn't taken you in, sent you to school, and given you the best conditions, how could you have achieved what you have today? Don't tell me you're thinking of abandoning Feifei just because you're successful? Uncle, I've said it before. I treat Feifei as my sister. I'll do my best to take care of her. What's more useful than marrying her and accompanying her for the rest of her life? Seeing that Jean Hauser still wanted to speak, he went forward and patted him on the shoulder. All right, you should be tired today. Go and rest. As for the wedding date, I'll get someone to pick a good day. Anyway, you guys already understand and are familiar with each other. If you need time, then get engaged first, then get married. Uncle. All right, I still have work to deal with. You can go back to your room and rest first. Chen Yongchang didn't listen to Jean Hauser. He waved his hand and sent him away. Jean Hauser glanced at Chen Yongchang, then finally took a step back and left the study. Before he returned to his room, he saw the family's servants coming down from upstairs with 2 large garbage bags. Jean Hauser stood there until the servant left. Then he went upstairs again. Shi Mingwan was shocked when she received Xiaoqi's call. Hello. Hello, Mingwan. Xiaoqi's voice sounded very happy. Have you recovered from your cold? Yes. Thank you for your concern. It wasn't a cold, but Shi Mingwan couldn't say that. What's the matter? That's good. I said I wanted to come and see you. No need. Shi Mingwan answered a little quickly. She looked at the time. Jean Hauser hadn't returned yet, but she had already prepared the food. That's a pity. Xiaoqi thought for a moment. Mingwan, we didn't finish watching the movie that day. Do you have time recently? I might not have time recently. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. My studio has received a new order recently, so I'm a little busy. I see. Xiaoqi nodded. Then can we have a meal together? Xiaoqi. Look, you're very busy and don't have time to watch a movie. Then you have to have time to eat, right? Before I came, Auntie told me that you don't know how to take care of yourself. Look, you can't let me disappoint Auntie, can you? Sure, Mengwan bit her lip. After thinking about it, she decided to agree. At least she should make things clear to him. Then how about this? Let's meet at noon tomorrow. Okay. Xiaoqi was satisfied. He said a few more words of concern to her and told her to take good care of herself before hanging up. Sure, Mengwan sat down and took out her phone to call Jean Hauser. However, no one picked up after calling for a long time. She looked at the table of dishes, and her good mood seemed to have suddenly disappeared. She had been very happy these past few days. Jean Hauser had been here with her. During the day, she stayed at home to draw, while Jean Hauser went to work. At night they ate together, took a walk and lingered. Jean Hauser was much gentler than before. At least, he no longer tormented her for fun. She could also get happiness from that matter. When her body merged with Jean Hauser's body, she felt satisfied. Not only her body, but also her heart. That was the dear brother she had been longing to find. That was the person she had always liked and loved. Looking at the black screen, Sure Mengwan sent another message to Jean Hauser. She didn't say anything unnecessary. She just asked him if he would come back for dinner. This time, Jean Hauser replied, I have something to do today. You eat first. Putting down her phone, Sure Mengwan looked at the dishes on the table and felt a headache. There was also a trace of undetectable disappointment and loneliness. The next day, Sure Mengwan arrived at the place she had agreed to meet Xiaoqi early. She had always been afraid of the cold. Today, she was wearing a thick khaki coat and a scarf of the same color. Her entire body looked much more plump. She thought that she had arrived early, but she didn't expect Xiaoqi to be earlier than her. Sorry I'm late. Not at all. I arrived early. Xiaoqi got up and pulled a chair for Sure Mengwan. This action made Sure Mengwan a little uncomfortable. She took a step back and looked at Xiaoqi. I'll do it myself. Can't you give me a chance to serve a beauty? This person. Sure Mengwan really didn't know what to say. She didn't decline anymore and sat down. The temperature of the air conditioner in the room was very high. She took off her coat and put it aside. Are all fashion designers as good at dressing as you? Xiaoqi looked at the clothes she was wearing, and there was obvious admiration in his eyes. Sure Mengwan looked at herself and cleared her throat. Thank you. I think so. But I think you're definitely the best at dressing, Xiaoqi whispered. After all, they can't be as beautiful as you. Thank you. Sure Mengwan felt a little uncomfortable from his praise. The waiter happened to bring the menu over at this moment, and Xiaoqi very gracefully let Sure Mengwan order first. After ordering the dishes, Sure Mengwan looked at Xiaoqi and thought about how to speak to him. At this moment, Xiaoqi poured her a cup of hot tea. It's cold outside. Have a cup of tea first. Thank you. To be honest, Xiaoqi was really a very good marriage partner. No matter what, he was very suitable. But this was how the world was. You might not like the suitable one. Xiaoqi, last time, I was going to introduce my situation, but I didn't finish. I think I'd better tell you about it. Her serious attitude made Xiaoqi also become a little serious. Hun, go ahead. I want to say that we're actually not suitable. Why? What's wrong with me? Xiaoqi asked instinctively. After asking, he realized that he seemed to be too narcissistic. I'm sorry, I just think that I think my qualifications are not bad. So I think you can give it a try. Sure Mengwan shook her head. The problem isn't with you, it's with me. She picked up the cup with both hands and held it in her hand. She felt the slight heat wake her up. I have someone I like. This time, Xiaoqi was stunned. You have someone you like? Yes. Then why did you come on a blind date? He saw that Sure Mengwan didn't look like one of those two-timing women. Because my parents don't know. And even if they did, they might object. I see. She didn't say more, but Xiaoqi seemed to understand. Is it because the person you like can't agree to your family's conditions? So your parents object? Sure Mengwan knew that it wasn't because of that. But since Xiaoqi was certain, she didn't want to explain anymore. Her silence was tacit agreement. Xiaoqi nodded. I understand. The person you like doesn't want to marry into the family, and your parents object? Thinking about it, most men, especially now that many of them were only children, how could they agree to marry into the family? Mengwan, we already know each other. I think if possible, you should go and do the ideological work for your parents. That would be better. I thank you, but there's no need. Some things aren't as simple as you think. Sure, Mengwan hadn't told her family about this at all, nor did she tell Jean Hausa. She wasn't sure if Jean Hausa would agree or not. She wasn't willing to continue, so Xiaoqi didn't ask. The waiter began to serve the dishes, and the two of them ate in silence. When Xiaoqi put down the bowl and chopsticks, he looked at Shi Mengwan. You like that person a lot? I love him. Shi Mengwan also put down her chopsticks. When she answered these 3 words, her eyes lit up, and her entire face was filled with the light of love. What else did Xiaoqi not understand? Okay. I got it. I won't disturb you again next time. Sorry. It's okay. Xiaoqi was able to let it go. But Mengwan, as your friend, I still want to give you a suggestion. Since you like that man so much, then can that man also sacrifice himself for you? I don't think it's a big deal to marry into the family. Even if the child takes your surname, he will still be his child in the future. This is the truth. Times are different, so there are some things that don't need to be rigidly formal. What do you think? Thank you, I understand. I'm sorry, I was being too talkative. Anyway, I feel that if that man really loves you, he will definitely agree to this condition. Shi Mengwan was silent. After Xiaoqi left, she was still sitting in her seat. If a man really loved her, would he agree to her conditions? But when that person was Jean Hausa, why didn't she have any confidence at all? That night, Jean Hausa didn't come again. She called him, and he said that he had something to do. Shi Mengwan hung up the phone, and thought about how to bring up this matter the next time she saw Jean Hausa. It wasn't until the 3rd day that Shi Mengwan finally saw Jean Hausa when she returned home. He didn't look any different, but Shi Mengwan could tell from his furrowed brows that he seemed to be a little depressed. Jean Hausa. Chapter 672. Jean Hausa shook his head and reached out to pull her into his arms. Shi Mengwan was hugged by him, and she didn't move for a moment. She wanted to look up at him, but the back of her head was held down by him. The faint smell of mint on his body entered her nose. Shi Mengwan noticed that Jean Hausa seemed to be different from before. After a while, he finally let go of her hand. His big hand caressed her cheek, and she just looked at him. Have you eaten? No. Shi Mengwan looked in the direction of the kitchen. I'm about to cook. Go. Shi Mengwan glanced at him. She wasn't in a hurry to go to the kitchen. Instead, she looked at him. Are you really okay? Jean Hausa shook his head. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. She knew that Jean Hausa was always like this. When he was still her dear brother, he didn't like to tell her anything. I'll go cook. While eating, Shi Mengwan kept looking at Jean Hausa. She paused when she met his gaze. Jean Hausa. Yes. I don't know much about business, but if you have anything to say, you can tell me. I might not be able to help, but I can listen to you. Jean Hausa was stunned for a moment. He looked at Shi Mengwan and nodded slightly. Okay. He said okay, but he might not really agree. Shi Mengwan knew. She didn't ask anymore. Just when she thought Jean Hausa wouldn't speak, Jean Hausa spoke. I have to go out tomorrow. Shi Mengwan didn't expect him to take the initiative to tell her about his whereabouts. Her hand holding the chopsticks stopped there, and she stared at him blankly. I might be gone for more than half a month. That long? Shi Mengwan bit her lip. Her words were unconsciously tainted with disappointment. Jean Hausa didn't say anything and just continued eating. Shi Mengwan knew his personality. He couldn't say anything nice, but she still hoped to see Jean Hausa's reluctance to part with her. However, he appeared so calm. Shi Mengwan didn't wait for Jean Hausa to say that he was reluctant to part with her. However, at night, it was as if he had returned to the beginning of their relationship. He took with all his might and plundered with all his might. In the end, Shi Mengwan felt that her waist was about to break, but Jean Hausa didn't stop until she was exhausted and fell into a deep sleep. When Shi Mengwan woke up in the morning, Jean Hausa was already gone. Looking at the empty house, She could not help but feel a sense of loss in her heart. He picked up his phone to check the time. When he opened the webpage, he saw 2 words. Wait for me. There were no more words, only these 2 words. Shi Mengwan's disappointment suddenly disappeared. Of course she would wait for him. She had waited for so long. He didn't mind waiting for another half a month. No one knew where he was going or what he was going to do. Half a month. Come to think of it, that was really a long time. Shi Mengwan's dilemma didn't last long. She received a call from Su Qingseng. Su Qingseng and Hua Jinyao had decided to return to Rong City together. Not only did they want to go back, but they also wanted to bring Xiang Kaiping back with them. The melancholy of parting made Shi Mengwan recover from the disappointment she felt just now. Shi Mengwan and Su Qingseng were high school classmates and deskmates. Ever since the 2 of them met, they had gotten along very well in the past few years, because they were very compatible. Even though the 2 of them later chose completely different majors, their relationship had always been very good. The medical university was also very close to Herzi University. Although going to Rong City was still in the country, it couldn't be compared to Lin City. On the 13th of the year, Su Qingseng and Hua Jinyao were at the airport, preparing to fly to Rong City. Shi Mengwan was reluctant to leave. She went to the airport early and talked to Su Qingseng for a long time. Su Qingseng was also reluctant to leave her, and she didn't look very happy. She seemed to have something on her mind. Shi Mengwan didn't think too much about it, thinking that she was reluctant to leave Lin City. In fact, she was also reluctant to leave. She didn't sleep well last night, and there were dark circles under her eyes. When Su Qingseng noticed it, she could only remind her again not to focus on drawing next time, and ignore her health. Shi Mengwan knew that she really cared about her, and was touched. After sending Su Qingseng away, Shi Mengwan thought for a while, and put her energy back into work. Since she planned to participate in the competition in France, she had to put some effort into it. On the day of the Lantern Festival, Shi Mengwan thought of Jean Hauser again. She still remembered that year when the 2 of them ate lantern dumplings together. And she also remembered that he bought the wine-fermented meatballs as lantern dumplings. Not wanting her emotions to be trapped in her thoughts of Jean Hauser, Shi Mengwan went home. Mother Shi made the lantern dumplings and waited for her. When she ate the lantern dumplings, she took a photo and posted it on her WeChat Moments. Then, she sent the photo to Jean Hauser alone. The lantern dumplings are very sweet. I miss you very much. She never received a reply from Jean Hauser. At first, Shi Mengwan kept looking at her phone, but later, she simply put it down. She focused on accompanying her parents and sister. At the same time in Qing City, Jean Hauser was sitting in the car, and beside him was his assistant Tang Hua. President Jean. Tang Hua placed a document in Jean Hauser's hand. I've already checked. The old man isn't feeling well, and has already been hospitalized. He was sent in yesterday. It's the festival today. The old man dislikes those people for being noisy and chased them away. Jean Hauser casually flipped through the information in front of him under the lights in the car. Are you sure there's no one? There are bodyguards guarding the door and doctors on duty. Let's go. Jean Hauser placed the document back in Tang Hua's hand. Let's go meet the old man. Boss. Tang Hua even called him by his old name. Isn't it too early? I heard from the doctor that he has already passed the critical stage. It seems that the old man can still live for a long time. We don't have to be in a hurry. No. Jean Hauser stared at the entrance of the hospital with a sinister gaze. I don't want to wait anymore. In the VIP ward of the hospital, the entire floor was very quiet. The weather in Qing City had been pretty good these few days. The full moon hung high in the sky outside. In the ward, an old man who looked to be in his 70s was sleeping on the hospital bed with his eyes tightly closed. The sudden sound in the room made him open his eyes. The environment he had been in for decades made him instantly alert. His hand reached under the pillow. If I were you, I wouldn't act rashly now. The man deliberately lowered his voice, but it sounded very clear. The old man's hand paused. The lights in the ward were turned on at this moment, and he narrowed his eyes. After adapting to the light, he looked at Jean Hauser in front of him. It's you. It seems that the old man knows me. Then I don't need to introduce myself. Jean Hauze walked to the sofa opposite the bed and sat down. He folded his legs elegantly, and he looked relaxed and leisurely. The old man stared at him for a long time and nodded gently. I didn't expect you to come back after so many years. Yes, I've disappointed you that I didn't die outside. Jean Hauze met the old man's sharp gaze and didn't dodge at all. The corners of his lips curled up with a hint of mockery. The old man coughed a few times, and his face was redder than before. You came back to take revenge? The old man narrowed his eyes. His old and shrewd eyes didn't miss any of Jean Hauze's expressions. The corners of Jean Hauze's lips curled up slightly. He leaned back against the back of the sofa. Shouldn't I? The old man was silent and stared at Jean Hauze. What do you want to do? You should ask me what I did. The old man glared at Jean Hauze, and a hint of wariness suddenly appeared in his eyes. What did you do? Jean Hauze didn't answer the old man's question. He got up and walked to the end of the bed. He pulled out the medical record and glanced at it. I think it's better for you not to know now. Putting the medical record back, Jean Hauze's expression was indifferent. Otherwise, I'm afraid that if you know, your condition will worsen and you die of anger. That would be my sin. Don't you think so? Grandpa. You. The old man covered his chest because of his words. His other hand pointed at Jean Hauze, and his face was livid. Jean Hauze looked at him without any fluctuation. He looked at this old man, who could be considered to be in his twilight years, Jean Cohen. Jean Cohen had difficulty breathing. He reached out his hand to get the medicine. The moment he got the medicine bottle, Jean Hauze gently pinched the bottle in his hand. He flipped the bottle over and raised it a little higher. Grandpa, why are you angry? You are the pillar of the Jean family now. If you were to fall, the Jean family would be in a mess. Jean Cohen's expression became even uglier. He looked at Jean Hauze, as if he was looking at an azure from hell. He raised his hand, but he didn't manage to grab the medicine. He could only reach out and want to ring the bell for help. Jean Hauze looked at his movements and saw that his trembling fingers were about to touch the bell. However, he grabbed Jean Cohen's hand the moment he was about to touch it. Jean Cohen panted even more violently. Jean Hauze expressionlessly pressed his body back onto the bed. Before he could react, he poured out a pill from the bottle and put it into his mouth. After feeding him the medicine, he seemed to have been stained with something dirty. He took out a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands clean. After taking the medicine, Jean Cohen's breathing finally stopped. However, his expression couldn't recover for a while. Seeing Jean Hauze's actions, his face turned from white to red again. His swollen face, which had almost turned purple, looked a little terrifying under the light. You, Jean Cohen pointed at Jean Hauze, and spent a lot of effort to finish his sentence. You, what exactly do you want to do? Jean Hauze looked at the expression on Jean Cohen's face, and suddenly smiled. He rarely smiled, and his smile at this moment undoubtedly carried deep malice. He threw the handkerchief to the side, bent down, and looked at Jean Cohen. He looked at his old and turbid eyes, and said word by word extremely slowly, I'm here to get back what I deserve. Jean Cohen glared at him, and his hands trembled even more. Jean Hauze didn't want to let it go just like that. He moved forward a little, and his voice was even softer than before. After you get it, destroy it. Jean Cohen was completely out of breath this time. His eyes widened, and his breath was stuck there, almost suffocating. The corners of Jean Hauze's lips curled into a mocking smile. Before the other party completely fainted, he pressed the bell. He stood up straight and looked at Jean Cohen's powerless hand. He left the ward without looking back. When he left, he bumped into the doctors who had rushed over. The doctors were very concerned about the people in this special ward. When they saw Jean Hauze suddenly appear, they didn't understand where this person came from. Jean Hauze acted as if he didn't see them and walked straight out. The bodyguard who had been staying inside just now had already come back to his senses. He reached out to stop Jean Hauze. Jean Hauze glanced at the two people coldly. The aura of the two bodyguards was actually taken away by him, and they took a step back at the same time. After coming out of the hospital, Tang Hua was already waiting outside. When he saw Jean Hauze come out, he was the first to open the car door for him. When Jean Hauze got into the car, He also got into the car. Boss. Don't worry, I won't die. Jean Hauser looked at the impatient building outside the car window. His eyes were a little cold. He reached out and took out the document from just now to look at it. Old fox. Boss. Tang Hua looked at him. Are we going back to the hotel next? Jean Hauser was about to nod when his phone rang. He opened it and saw a message. On it was a bowl of glutinous rice balls. Looking at the photo and the words, the corners of Jean Hauser's lips unconsciously curled up a little. His finger swiped across the screen and was about to reply. Bang! Their car was hit by someone from behind. Jean Hauser's phone flew out and fell into the car. He turned around abruptly, and Tang Hua turned around with him. The two of them saw that under the night sky, 3 cars were following behind them. They had already surrounded their car. Boss. Tang Hua looked at Jean Hauser worriedly. Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes. Speed up. The driver heard his words and stepped on the accelerator. They accelerated, and the car behind them also accelerated. At this moment, the car on the right was once again heading in their direction and slamming hard into them. With a bang, the car that Jean Hauser and the others were sitting in was knocked to the side, and then it slammed heavily into the side guardrail. The car collided extremely violently, but the 3 cars behind it didn't intend to let it go just like that. The car behind them followed suit and crashed into them. There was another pung sound. This time, it was even louder than the previous 2 times. Shi Mingwan waited until midnight, but she didn't receive a reply from Jean Hauser. Her mood dropped again. She ate lantern dumplings with her parents, admired the moon, and chatted with her sister. When she returned to her room, she couldn't fall asleep. She tossed and turned on the bed, feeling conflicted. She couldn't help but take out her phone to take a look. There was still no reply from Jean Hauser. She bit her lip and couldn't help but feel a little lonely. She didn't know who said that it wasn't because she was lonely that she missed him, but because she missed him that she was lonely. In the past, she thought that these words were pretentious, but now she realized that it was true. It wasn't pretentious. She couldn't help but want to call Jean Hauser, but she was worried that Jean Hauser really had something to do. After thinking about it, she could only continue sending messages. Good night. After sending these 2 words, Shi Mingwan waited for a while, but before she could receive a reply from Jean Hauser, she fell asleep in a depressed and conflicted mood. Dear brother. Shi Mingwan looked at Xiao Zhe with an obvious smile in her eyes. Are you serious? Today, the young man came home and told her that he had helped her solve the problem of going to school, so she could continue going to school. This news made her exceptionally happy. Yes. The young man nodded. Looking at the news he brought, Shi Mingwan's eyes lit up. She felt that this decision was right. That's really great. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but reach out and hug Xiao Zhe. Dear brother, how did you do it? Xiao Zhe was caught off guard by her and felt a little uncomfortable. His hand hung there and didn't move for a long time. After Shi Mingwan finished hugging him, she realized that she was a little too excited. She took a step back and looked at the young man, feeling a little embarrassed. Dear brother, when can I go to school? You can go tomorrow. Xiao Zhe looked at Shi Mingwan. It's the nearby 5th high school. They have already agreed to accept you. You can go and register tomorrow. Then you can go to school. Really? Shi Mingwan was very happy. That's really great. After being happy, she looked at the young man with concern. Then dear brother, what about you? Me? What about me? I'm going to school. What about you? I won't go. It's the same for you. Dear brother? Shi Mingwan looked at the young man. Even if she didn't understand the key point, she could understand that with Xiao Zhe's current ability, he must have done something for her to be able to go to school without a Lin City hukou. She didn't understand what he had done. To her, everything about the young man was like a mystery. He could always solve all the problems in the shortest time. Dear brother, if you don't go to school, then I won't go either. What nonsense are you talking about? The young man glared at her. Didn't you want to be a designer? Why? You don't want to anymore? Shi Mingwan bit her lip and looked at the young man. She kept shaking her head. No, I want to be, but I want to go to school with you. All right, you don't have to worry about my matters. The young man looked at her with a strong expression that couldn't be refused. Don't worry about me for now. I've asked the teacher. She said that you haven't been to school for the past 6 months and might not be able to keep up. Before school starts, you have to buy a semester's worth of books to read first. Dear brother, let's go. I'll take you to buy books. Sure, Mingwan couldn't win against Xiaozhe, so she could only compromise. She didn't quite understand why the young man didn't go to school himself. She vaguely knew why, but at that time, she was still young, so she couldn't understand the answer. Sure, Mingwan waited for a few days, but John Hauser didn't appear. Another half a month passed, and it was already the first month of the lunar calendar. In the middle of the second month of the lunar calendar, the temperature in Lin City began to rise. At first, Sure Mingwan would try to call Jean Hauser, but after she realized that she couldn't get through to his phone, she stopped calling him. Every day before she went to bed, she would call Jean Hauser. If she couldn't get through, she would send another message. If no one replied, she would go back to sleep. At the same time as the weather warmed up, Sure Mingwan's work also passed the preliminary round of the French fashion design competition. The other party sent an invitation letter and asked Sure Mingwan to prepare to go to France to participate in the rest of the competition. This good news more or less made Sure Mingwan feel a little better, but it only lasted for less than half a day. Chapter 673. Sure Mingwan was wearing the new clothes Xiaozhe had bought for her, and carrying the new school bag Xiaozhe had bought for her. The book inside was also bought by Xiaozhe. The school bag was very heavy, not only for this semester, but also for the previous semester. Fortunately, Sure Mingwan's grades had always been good. Although she didn't study last semester, she believed that she would work hard to catch up. She was thinking about why the teacher called her today and didn't give her any homework. Instead, he asked her to read through the books that she had read before. If there was anything she didn't understand, she could look for her teacher. She was in a good mood and quickened her pace. After living in this bungalow for more than half a year, she was no longer as careless as when she first came here. Turn right, turn left. Just 3 more alleys and they would reach home. But before he got there, he heard the sounds of fighting. This area was really chaotic. Sure Mingwan couldn't help but quicken her steps. She wanted to avoid it, but she heard a familiar voice. What? Haven't you learned your lesson from last time? The youth's voice had already passed the stage of puberty. His voice had already begun to become clear and bright, and it was the voice she heard every day. She widened her eyes and couldn't help but stop in her tracks. She quietly walked over and hid behind the corner of the wall. She silently poked her head out. Beside the young man stood a few boys that she did not recognize. They were all about the same age as him. There were a few people lying on the ground. The leader's face was covered in blood, and the young man's foot was stepping on the man's chest. What if you haven't learned it? I'll say it again. This place as well as the East Pier are all my territory. The next time you cross the border, I won't be polite anymore. The young man was already more than 1.8 meters tall and he was thin. Most of the time, although he was quiet in front of her, he was gentle. Sure Mingwan had never seen this youth before. Her heart was beating a little fast. The person he was stepping on wanted to get up. Stinking brat, I'm telling you, don't be arrogant. Brother Liang won't let you off. Ha! The youth laughed. It was a very arrogant laugh. He began to exert force on his leg. Brother Liang won't let me off, right? Then let him try. Not to mention Brother Liang. Even if he had the ability to call Big Boss Hui over, I wouldn't be afraid of him. Understand? As he spoke, his foot was pressed against the man's chin. That person's neck was stepped on, and his face was filled with pain. His face, which had already been beaten into a pig's head, looked even scarier now. You. The man started to lose his breath, but the young man had no intention of letting go. Not only did he not, but he also stepped even harder. The man's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets, and he was about to stop breathing. Sure Mingwan was shocked and couldn't help but gasp. That voice was very soft, but it moved Xiaozhe. The young man's gaze shifted over. Sure Mingwan quickly retracted her body, but she was still a step too late, and was seen by the youth. The young man's expression was rather ugly. He retracted his leg, caught his breath, and coughed violently. He turned to look at the few people following him, and gave them a look. Those people began to deal with the aftermath. The people lying on the ground were quickly dragged away by them. The young man's expression was solemn, as he clenched his fists at his sides. He was only stunned for a few seconds before he reacted. His slender legs walked step by step in Shimengwan's direction. Shimengwan's body was trembling. In the past half a year that she had been with the young man, other than occasionally coming back with some injuries, the young man had rarely been injured in the past few days. She knew that he would fight outside, but she had never seen the young man treat others like this. It turned out that the young man wasn't uninjured. Instead, had he changed from a victim to a perpetrator? Shimengwan didn't dare to think about it. Her body was trembling. She didn't know what she was afraid of. However, the ruthlessness on the young man's face just now really scared her. A pair of long legs suddenly appeared in front of her eyes. She looked up along the legs and saw the young man's expressionless face. Her body actually went limp, and she sat on the ground just like that. The young man wasn't in a hurry to reach out to help her up. He was already 16 years old. He was tall and thin, and one could already see the shadow of an adult on his body. He stared at her face from above, his lips opening and closing. He saw it. Shimengwan instinctively wanted to shake her head, but her body was cold, and she couldn't say a word. However, there was a hint of fear in her eyes as she looked at him. The young man looked at her and reached out his hand to her. Shimengwan's body trembled. Thinking about the scene just now, she instinctively retreated, wanting to avoid the young man's hand. Xiaozhe narrowed his eyes, and there was a hint of danger in them. He had asked someone to think of a way to get Shimengwan a place to go to school, because he didn't want her to stay at home every day, and he didn't want her to see him like this today. However, he didn't expect her to still see it. Looking at Shimengwan's avoiding gaze, he forcefully reached out his hand and took away Shimengwan's school bag. He carried it on his shoulder. Before she could react to what he was going to do, he bent down and picked her up. Shimengwan's body trembled even more, but she was familiar with the young man's embrace. She looked at the young man's handsome side profile and swallowed her saliva. The young man didn't seem to notice that something was wrong with her. He just carried her back to the bungalow where they were. After Shimengwan entered the door, her legs were still a little weak. The young man placed her on the sofa. Almost as soon as she was put down by him, she shrunk to the other side of the sofa. The young man suddenly moved his face closer. His big hand supported her side as he stared at her face. "Are you afraid of me?" Shimengwan looked at the young man's familiar face. These days they slept together every night. Sometimes, when she was cold, she would wake up to find herself in the young man's arms. The environment of the bungalow was bad, but she had never been cold. She had never been hungry. She suddenly shook her head. Her movements were very gentle but firm. Before the young man could take his hand away, Shimengwan bit her lip and said timidly, Did you want to kill him just now?" He didn't expect her to ask such a question. The young man was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head. "No." Shimengwan seemed to be relieved. "You don't kill anyone, okay?" The young man looked into her eyes and caressed her face with his slender and well-defined hands. "Okay, I won't kill anyone." Shimengwan heaved a sigh of relief. The young man's hands were a little cold. The weather hadn't turned warm in this season. She looked at him with a hint of anticipation in her eyes. "Killing is against the law." She said this in a very low voice. The young man seemed to want to laugh, but he held it in. "Yes, killing is against the law. One really knows a lot." He was treating her like a child. Shimengwan gritted her teeth and suddenly raised her voice. "Don't care. If you kill someone, you'll go to prison. I won't go to see you when the time comes." She said it resolutely, but the expression in her eyes was completely different. The young man looked at her duplicitous look and raised his eyebrows. "Oh, if I go to prison, you won't come to see me?" "Of course." Shimengwan nodded and emphasized. "If you go to prison, I'll go home and let you be alone in the future." Her face was young and childish. The young man suddenly reached out and hugged her in his arms. "Okay, I'll listen to you." His embrace made Shimengwan relax. She wasn't as afraid as before. and she was no longer trembling. "Dear brother, don't do anything dangerous, okay?" The young man didn't answer her question. He just tightened his arms. Mengwan had a little difficulty breathing, but she still had to say, "If you do something dangerous, what will I do?" She reached out to push him away, and moved away from his arms a little. "Dear brother, if you're really locked up, or if something else happens, what will I do?" After such a long time, she had run away from home, but she had never felt lonely because of him. His care and love for her made her forget the loneliness of being alone. More importantly, she realized that her dear brother was different in her heart. "Dear brother, I don't want anything to happen to you, and I don't want to be separated from you, so you have to take care of yourself, okay?" The young man looked into her eyes. Her lips opened and closed as she said words that she was worried about him. Today, she saw his dark side, but she wasn't afraid, nor did she run away. He couldn't tell what he felt in his heart. Something was surging in his heart. He hugged her tightly again, and buried his face in the crook of her neck. His voice was very soft as he smelled the faint fragrance of a young girl on her body. "Okay, I promise you. I'll take care of myself and won't be separated from you." "Really? Really?" Mengwan raised her head and looked into the young man's eyes. Her heart had already calmed down. She bit her lip. "Dear brother, we'll always be together, right?" "Yes." The young man nodded and looked into Mengwan's eyes with a focused expression. "We'll always be together." He would be with her, protect her, and not let anyone hurt her. "Dear brother." Mengwan reached out and hugged the young man's waist. No matter how her dear brother treated others, as long as they could be like this forever, it would be fine. She hugged him very tightly until she saw the trace of blood on the young man's sleeve. She was shocked and forced herself not to look and not to care. She stepped back. She gestured for him to take a shower. She washed his clothes for him, so the blood stain was naturally washed away. However, even though Mengwan could wash away the blood stain, it didn't mean that she could forget the young man's ruthless expression. That night she inevitably had nightmares. She dreamed that the young man was holding a knife in his hand and was constantly slashing at a person whose face couldn't be seen clearly. She screamed with all her might, trying to make the young man stop. When the young man saw her coming, he finally stopped. The young man walked towards her and told her not to be afraid. Mengwan kept shaking her head. Looking at the police who rushed over, she wanted to tell the young man to leave quickly, but she couldn't say anything. She could only watch helplessly as the police took the young man away. No matter how much she cried, it was useless. At this moment, the scene in the dream changed. The young man's face became Jean Hausa. When she saw Jean Hausa again, it was through the iron window. Mengwan was frightened. She wanted to pull his hand, but his figure was getting further and further away. She woke up from her dream screaming, "Dear brother, dear brother." The scene in the dream began to enlarge, and that feeling made her fall into deep despair. She opened her eyes and was shocked by the figure at the head of the bed. When she saw clearly, she realized that the person sitting there was Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa? She wasn't fully awake yet, nor had she recovered from the dream. She suddenly saw him, and she still felt like she was in a dream. Yes. In the next second, Mengwan suddenly sat up and wrapped her arms around Jean Hausa's neck. She hugged him tightly. "Dear brother, dear brother." When she thought of the figure in the iron window in her dream, she felt a strong sense of insecurity. She hugged him very tightly and pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Jean Hausa let her hug him and didn't move. Mengwan suddenly raised her head and kissed his lips. Her kiss was a little urgent and a little flustered. She was also a little scared. She didn't know what her dear brother had experienced all these years. What made him, a street thug, suddenly become a business elite. She also didn't know how he started the company and what hardships he had experienced. But she thought that he should be safe now, right? It shouldn't be like what she thought in her dream, right? She couldn't help but think of the last time they met. He seemed to be fighting with someone again. That made the feeling of insecurity even more obvious. "Dear brother." She kissed his lips haphazardly. All her experience came from him. In this aspect, she was undoubtedly clumsy. But this clumsiness made Jean Hausa lose control. Her hands tugged at his clothes. She was a little anxious. She was so anxious that she couldn't unbuckle her belt even after trying a few times. Her face was red. But at this moment, Jean Hauser turned the tables and pressed her down on the bed. It was a dark night, and the weather outside was a little gloomy. Spring had arrived and there was a lot of rain. It was accompanied by the occasional sound of spring thunder. Soon it started to rain outside. The sound of the thunderstorm covered up the sound of the collision in the room. Those emotions that were out of control also existed on such a thunderstorm night. When Shi Mengwan woke up in the morning, she thought she had a dream. She dreamed that Jean Hauser had returned, and that he was fine. She dreamed that they were the same as before. She enjoyed the pleasure of being intimate. She opened her eyes, and the feeling of exhaustion and weakness in her body suddenly woke her up. It wasn't a dream. Was Jean Hauser really back? She sat up abruptly, ignoring the marks on her body and the discomfort on her body. There was no one in the room. She casually put on her clothes and went outside. Jean Hauser had just closed the door. On the dining table beside him was breakfast that had just been delivered. "You're awake." Shi Mengwan blinked her eyes. Only then did she confirm that she was really not dreaming. She went forward and hugged Jean Hauser again. She rubbed her face against his chest and smelled the mint scent on his body. Her heart slowly relaxed, and she finally wasn't so nervous anymore. She looked up at him and realized that he seemed to have lost a little weight. She didn't take a closer look last night, but now that it was daytime, she took a closer look and realized that Jean Hauser had lost a lot of weight. Not only had he lost weight, but he also looked a little haggard. "You?" She had many questions to ask, but in the end, she could only hug him again. Thinking of his appearance, she sniffed and her eyes inexplicably felt a little hot. Jean Hauser let her hug him without moving. After a while he patted her back. "Let's eat." Shi Mengwan nodded and walked to the dining table to sit down. Today wasn't the weekend, and she still had to go to work. She looked up at Jean Hauser. "You're back from your business trip? Can you rest for the next few days?" "Yes." Shi Mengwan nodded and looked at him again. "Will you come back for dinner tonight?" Jean Hauser looked at her. He still had a lot of things to do. He had to leave again after a few days, but okay. She wanted to refuse, but the words that came out of her mouth became affirmative. Shi Mengwan smiled and seemed to be relieved. After dinner, Shi Mengwan went to the company. She had spent a few days to draw the work that she was going to compete in. She had named it Blue Mystery. To her, Jean Hauser was that mystery. But she wasn't in a hurry. She had the patience to slowly solve this mystery. Jean Hauser got into the car, and Tang Hua looked at him worriedly. "Boss, are you okay?" Jean Hauser shook his head. The car accident had caused Jean Hauser to suffer some minor injuries. However, he refused to rest for long. Instead, after he finished his matters in Qing City, he came here. He roughly knew that the person upstairs was his boss's favorite. "But, boss, I'm afraid we'll have a lot of things to do in the future. Moreover, the situation is getting more and more chaotic. It's not appropriate for you to be like this now." Tang Hua had followed Jean Hauser for a long time. In the past 10 years, what hadn't they experienced? But in the past, those undercurrents were still calm on the surface, but now it was different. Jean Hauser's appearance in Qing City was equivalent to turning everything over to the surface. Although that car accident didn't cause much damage, it was definitely a warning. Zhang Kuan wasn't dead yet, and those people below weren't honest. Not to mention that there were countless people who didn't like Jean Hauser and wanted to get rid of him. "Boss, why don't you stay away from Miss Shi for now?" With their current abilities, even if they could protect Shi Mengwan, it wouldn't be good for such a big weakness to be known by others. Jean Hauser leaned against the back of the chair with his eyes half closed. His face was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. He didn't say anything, so Tang Hua couldn't say much. The car drove towards the Qin Corporation's building. Just as they were about to reach the Qin Corporation's building, Jean Hauser finally spoke. "From tomorrow onwards, I'll move back to the Qin family. Boss, you've been living in the Qin family all this time. Do you think those people don't know?" The problem now wasn't where he lived, but he didn't finish his sentence. But Jean Hauser understood what he meant. His face was gloomy, and his expression looked quite solemn. Boss, just listen to me. Tang Hua had told him long ago, but John Hauze had always refused. Was he still hesitating at this time? Stop talking. Boss, what will happen if you get engaged to Miss Chen? It's not like you're getting married. This period of time is just right to divert their attention. It's good for you and sister-in-law, sure. John Hauze pursed his lips into a straight line, and his gaze kept looking out of the window. Seeing this, Tang Hua called out again. Chapter 674. There was silence in the car. John Hauze did not respond to Tang Hua's words. He knew that Tang Hua was right. At this stage, it was best and most suitable for him to get engaged to Chen Feifei. Putting aside the fact that it could divert the attention of that group of people, the Chen family had some influence in Xi province. Chen Feifei's maternal family also had a certain background. Although Chen Yongchang was a despicable person, he truly loved his daughter. Chen Feifei wasn't sure Mengwan. Moreover, it was just an engagement. It wouldn't affect anything. If he was rational, he would have agreed. Lowering his eyes, he rubbed his temples. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's solve the problem in front of us first. Boss, Tang Hua felt that it was a pity. This was a really good opportunity. All right. John Hauze was not only thinking about the matter in front of him, but also other things. Tell old 6 and old 7 to hurry up. He was really impatient from waiting. Understood. Tang Hua looked at John Hauze's expression and felt a little uncomfortable. Boss, don't worry. It's all temporary. When our troubles are resolved, you can be with sister-in-law. It was just that the troubles in front of them were not easy to solve. He knew, and so did John Hauze. The carriage fell into silence. After a long time, John Hauze turned his face and looked out of the window. They had already arrived at the Chen Corporation building. Thinking of Chen Yongchang, that old fox, his face darkened. During this period of time, Chen Yongchang's movements are also very big. Be on guard. I know. Tang Hua thought of Chen Yongchang, and there was a hint of disdain on his lips. However, when the car stopped, all traces of those emotions disappeared. John Hauze hadn't been in Lin City for a while, so there was a pile of work that he hadn't finished dealing with. For the whole morning, he was basically dealing with all kinds of official matters. Apart from the Chen Corporation's business, he was also responsible for several companies under his name. When it was almost lunchtime, Chen Feifei arrived. Brother Hao. Chen Feifei looked at John Hauze and felt very wronged. Where have you been all this time? Why aren't you back yet? I went on a business trip. John Hauze's voice was very soft. Chen Feifei found that it was very rare for John Hauze to not smile at her for a long time. But his attitude today could be considered gentle. She was happy in her heart, and the pout on her face lessened a little. Brother Hao, do you know how much I miss you? You're always busy when I call you, and you don't reply to my messages. I almost thought something happened to you. Didn't I tell you? I'm on a business trip. John Hauze looked at her. What's the matter? Can't I look for you if I have nothing to do? Chen Feifei stood in front of him. Brother Hao, you haven't eaten with me for a long time. No matter what, you have to eat with me today. I still have work here. Work, all you know is work. Chen Feifei pouted her lips. Work will never be finished. I want you to accompany me. She looked at the time and stepped forward to hold John Hauze's hand. Let's go. It's almost time for dinner. You still have time to eat, right? Feifei, let's go. Chen Feifei pulled John Hauze up. John Hauze originally wanted to pull her hand away, but he didn't know what he thought of. But he let her pull him up and go outside. When he passed by the assistant's office, he happened to see Tang Hua. When Tang Hua saw his actions, he obviously heaved a sigh of relief. President John. Yes. John Hauze nodded. I'm going out to eat with Feifei. You keep an eye on the company. Yes. Tang Hua nodded and gave John Hauze a look. President John, be careful on the road. I'm afraid there will be a traffic jam at this time. I know. Chen Feifei looked at Tang Hua, and then at John Hauze. There will be a traffic jam at this time? It can't be, right? Let's go. John Hauze brought Tang Hua downstairs. They went downstairs and got into the car. As expected, they saw a few tails behind them. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes. He didn't move. When Chen Feifei's face approached his arm, he didn't push her away. When they arrived at the restaurant, it was Chen Feifei's favorite restaurant. After entering the door, Zhang Haoze looked behind him from the corner of his eye. The car that was following them had already stopped on the opposite side of the road. There was a trace of mockery in Zhang Haoze's eyes. "Brother Hao, what do you want to eat? Anything is fine." Zhang Haoze turned to look at Chen Feifei. It was rare that he didn't give her a cold face like before. Shi Mengwan went to the studio today. After a while, she would go to France to participate in the fashion design competition. Before that, she had to arrange the content of the studio. However, today, she was obviously a little absent-minded. She was thinking about what to eat tonight. She hadn't seen Zhang Haoze for so long. Should she make it more grand today? With this thought in mind, Shi Mengwan couldn't help but turn on her phone. Here, she downloaded an app that specialized in teaching people how to cook. Looking at the menu inside, Shi Mengwan left the company early to buy ingredients. When she got home, she started preparing dinner. She sent a message to Zhang Haoze, asking him to remember to come back for dinner. When Zhang Haoze received his message, he had just driven out of the Chun Corporation's building. In the Chun Corporation's building, Zhang Haoze had already gotten into the car. He was about to head in the direction of Shi Mengwan's house, when he saw the people who had helped him shake off at noon following him again. Zhang Haoze's face darkened. Thinking about his apartment near the company, he turned the car around and drove in the direction of the apartment. During the rush hour, the traffic was very heavy. It wasn't easy for him to shake off those 3 cars. The car drove to the apartment. Because this was a high-end residential area, cars outside couldn't enter. So Zhang Haoze didn't have to worry about those people following him. After entering the underground parking lot, he went upstairs and changed his clothes. He disguised himself before going downstairs again. He changed his car and left from another exit. As expected, there were people guarding the other exit. He drove the car on the road, but the car behind him didn't move. When Zhang Haoze arrived at Shi Mengwan's apartment, she had already waited for him for nearly 2 hours. Seeing Zhang Haoze enter the door, Shi Mengwan's worry was half relieved, but she couldn't help but ask, "You've been at work until now?" "Yes," Zhang Haoze replied, but Shi Mengwan suddenly realized that something was wrong. "You?" Other than in bed, every time she saw Zhang Haoze, he was wearing a suit and shirt. Today he was wearing a casual jacket. "You didn't wear this to work this morning?" "Yes." Zhang Haoze nodded. "I accidentally poured coffee on my clothes at the company, so I changed." In fact, he had put on a beard and a hat just now, but he had removed those disguises before coming up. Shi Mengwan felt that it was a little strange, but she couldn't tell what was strange. After thinking about it, she pulled Zhang Haoze's hand. "Wait a moment. Dinner will be ready soon." Shi Mengwan gestured for him to wait for a while as she spoke. Then she went to the kitchen. Her footsteps were a little fast. Zhang Haoze didn't quite understand why she was in such a hurry until he saw the dining table. There was a candlestick on the white modern dining table. Beside the candlestick was a bouquet of white roses in an exquisite vase. It looked very festive. The tablecloths and cutlery had been laid out on both sides. From everything, it could be seen that Shi Mengwan had carefully arranged today's dinner. He still remembered the clothes she was wearing. A red close-fitting dress. Zhang Haoze couldn't help but get up and walk towards the kitchen. Shi Mengwan had just taken out the ingredients to process. When she saw him come in, her face was a little red. You go out. I'll be ready soon." With him here, she would be too embarrassed to show off. Zhang Haoze stood at the door and didn't move. He just stared at his face. Shi Mengwan felt more and more uncomfortable under his gaze. She reached out to push him. "Go out. Hurry up, go out." Zhang Haoze pulled her hand over, lowered his head, and kissed her lips hard. He didn't go deeper, and stopped after a brief kiss. "I'll wait for you." He finally left the kitchen. Shi Mengwan's face was a little red and a little hot. She patted her face to let her breathing and heartbeat return to normal. She turned around, looked at the ingredients on the cooking table, and began to work. She had tried frying steak before, but the taste was really only average. She only hoped that John Hauser wouldn't mind. Half an hour later, Shi Mingwan brought out the fried steak, the pasta she had made, and a salad. "It's ready to eat." She set everything up and looked at John Hauser, but he suddenly grabbed her hand. "I think you've also prepared wine?" "Wine?" Shi Mingwan's pretty face turned red. She had really prepared it. But when he said it directly, it gave her a feeling that he couldn't wait. She turned around shyly and took out the bottle of red wine from the wine cabinet. It's not a particularly expensive wine. She didn't know much about wine, so she just picked a relatively expensive bottle to buy. "It's okay." John Hauser stood up and watched her prepare all of this. He resisted the urge to go forward and hug her. Instead, he opened the wine and poured it for her and himself. Shi Mingwan sat down opposite him. The dining table wasn't big. She picked up her glass and clinked glasses with him. John Hauser took the glass from her hand and stared at her face with a burning gaze. "What's wrong?" Shi Mingwan felt uncomfortable under his gaze. "Is there something on my face?" "No." John Hauser shook his head and gently clinked glasses with her. "I just have something to tell you." "What?" What was it that made her so serious? "From tomorrow onwards, our company has a lot of things to do. I might not be able to come here every day." He was able to leave his home and come here successfully today because those people hadn't reacted yet. Once they reacted, it wouldn't be so simple. "You can't come here every day?" Shi Mingwan bit her lip, as if she was thinking about the meaning behind his words. "Then how long will it take?" John Hauser didn't say anything. He wasn't willing to give her a promise. "It'll take some time." Shi Mingwan lowered her head and took a sip of wine. She didn't know much about wine, but now she felt that this wine was a little bitter. "Yes, did you encounter any problems?" John Hauser looked at her and shook his head gently. "It's just ordinary work. I'll be fine after I'm done with this." "Oh." Shi Mingwan didn't know what else to say. "Let's eat." The meal was very quiet. Shi Mingwan even forgot to light the candle on the candlestick. She sat there feeling inexplicably depressed. However, when she looked at John Hauser's overly handsome facial features, she suppressed the depression in her heart. It didn't matter. There were also times when she didn't care about anything when she drew. This was just right. She was going to France to compete in a while, so it was good to take this time to prepare more. Although she thought so in her heart, her face still showed a reluctant expression. The food in front of her seemed to have become tasteless. The moment John Hauser raised his head, he saw her expression. He picked up the wine and took a sip. He stood up and walked in front of her. He picked her up and placed her on his lap. "Unhappy?" "No." John Hauser turned her face and looked at her. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. "If you want to be busy, go ahead. It just so happens that I have something to do too. So I've been very busy recently." She blinked. For some reason, she just felt that John Hauser wasn't telling the truth. But she didn't need him to tell the truth now. "I'm going to France to compete next month. It just so happens that I need to prepare well during this period of time. Why don't you not come until I come back from France?" With such a long time, it would be enough for him to finish his work, right? At this moment, her lips were suddenly kissed by John Hauser. He grabbed her waist and easily put his hand under the hem of her red dress. Shi Mingwan looked at him and reached out to wrap her arms around his neck. "Not here." However, John Hauser didn't listen to her. He gently bit her lips and let go. "Just here." His lips moved bit by bit to her ear. "Not just here. There's also the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom. Today we'll do it in every place." Shi Mingwan felt her face burning. The hint in his words almost made her unable to control herself. This man didn't speak much, but the things he did, and the words he occasionally said always made her feel that he was so indecent. However, she soon didn't have the energy to think more. Her body was squeezed open by him bit by bit. Her consciousness began to drift away from the ninth heaven. When John Hauser left Shi Mingwan's apartment, he put on his disguise again. He returned to his apartment at dawn. When he entered the apartment, he was not surprised to see the few cars waiting for him at the entrance of the neighborhood last night. There was a flash of darkness in his eyes. After entering the door, he removed his disguise and took out his phone to make a call. The other party only asked someone to follow him, but he didn't ask anyone to make a move. What did that mean? Was he looking for an opportunity? Or did he want to play a bigger game? No matter which it was, he would accompany him to the end. The moment the call was connected, he walked to the balcony and looked down at the few cars below. Help me do something. After hanging up the phone, his fingertips accidentally touched the photo album. There was a photo on it that had just been taken today. The faint light of the morning shone on Shermung-won's face. She was sleeping on the bed, her entire person peaceful and quiet. After staring at the photo for a while, Jean Hauser saved the photo into an encrypted document. He put the phone aside. Shermung-won didn't expect Jean Hauser to really not appear. When she woke up, he was already gone. There was still the dinner left by the two of them yesterday on the table. However, there was no trace of Jean Hauser in the room. He didn't even buy her breakfast like usual. Her body was a little sore and uncomfortable. She sat on the sofa, curled her legs and hugged her knees. She looked at the messy dining table for a long time, and suddenly smiled. It wasn't like they hadn't been separated before. Why did she make it seem like they were separated forever this time? Shermung-won, don't be so pretentious. After a while, when Jean Hauser is done with his work, he will come to find you. In the next half a month, she didn't see Jean Hauser. He really didn't appear. Shermung-won's entry was almost ready. In a week she would fly to France. Before that, Shermung-won went to Rome City to see Su Qing-sang. Su Qing-sang had been asking her to play since she went to Rome City in January, but Shermung-won wasn't free before. When she went to Rome City, Su Qing-sang put down her work to play with her. In the evening, she also took her to meet Hua Jinyao's group of childhood friends. Unexpectedly, Jean Hauser's childhood friend, Won Xianying, seemed to be interested in her. Before the party ended, he kept asking for her contact information. For Su Qing-sang's sake, she didn't want to refuse too obviously. She had no choice but to give him her WeChat. In the next 2 days, Won Xianying contacted her time and time again, saying that he wanted to be her director. Shermung-won had Su Qing-sang to accompany her, so she pushed him away if she could. When she really couldn't push him away, she would call Su Qing-sang along. Fortunately, Hua Jinyao's friends were all good. Although Won Xianying's intentions were obvious, he didn't go too far. This also made Shermung-won heave a sigh of relief. After playing in Rome City for a few days, Shermung-won prepared to go to France. The visa and procedures were all done. Although she was a little reluctant to part with Su Qing-sang, Shermung-won still returned to Lin City first. After returning home, Shermung-won called Jean Hauser, but no one answered. She could only send a message instead. There was no reply. 2 days before going to France, Shermung-won went home to visit her parents. She told them that she was going to France. Although Shermung-won was worried, she had no reason to object to what her daughter wanted to do. Shermung-won accompanied her parents for a day. Before boarding the plane, she called Jean Hauser again, but no one answered. After boarding the plane, Shermung-won took out her phone to look at the local news while waiting for the plane to take off. However, she saw such a piece of news on the public account of a certain news outlet. Mr. Jean Hauser, a rising star in the city's technology industry, and Chen Feifei, the daughter of the Chen Corporation, held an engagement ceremony yesterday. Below was a detailed introduction about Jean Hauser's identity and Chen Feifei's identity. There was also the situation of yesterday's engagement ceremony. Finally, was a company like the Chen Corporation also going to start entering the technology field? The accompanying picture was of Jean Hauser, Chen Feifei, and Chen Yongchang's face. Chapter 675. Shermung-won sat there with her hand tightly gripping her phone. Her heart was beating very fast. She tried her best to remain calm, but it was very difficult. Love fascinates people, love makes people dizzy. She was blinded by love. She trusted Jean Hauser blindly. His heart felt like it had been lightly stabbed by someone, and it hurt slightly. Feeling a little uncomfortable, she put down the phone and clutched her chest. Every scene and every moment after her reunion with Jean Hauser appeared in her mind one by one. She pressed on the position of her heart to calm herself down. Shermung-won, you are going to participate in the competition now. Let's talk about these matters of love when you come back. The plane landed. Assistant Xiao Ji and designer Tong Yin came to pick her up. This time, she was participating in the competition in the name of her studio. Apart from herself, she let little Ji and Tong Yin come over first to play the vanguard. Sister Shi, are you too tired from the flight? Xiao Ji had arrived the day before. She had come in advance and arranged a car. Now that he saw Shi Mengwan's expression wasn't good, he thought that she was too tired from the long flight. Not bad. How have you been these 2 days? Not bad. The one who spoke was Tong Yin. She had been here for 2 days and looked around. This is indeed the fashion capital. It's quite rewarding. Well, it's good that we got something. Let's go back to the hotel first. Shi Mengwan sorted out her emotions in just a few sentences. She wasn't alone. She had more important things to do right now. After getting into the car, Shi Mengwan and Tong Yin talked about the competition again. The fashion design competition was held in Paris, the fashion capital. When Tong Yin arrived, there were already quite a number of participants. It was a gathering of designers from more than a dozen countries around the world. Among the people who came, there were already those who had passed the preliminary round. Next was the semi-finals and the finals. Every match had a theme. In order to complete the work, it had to fit the theme of the competition. Then, from these works that fit the theme, the judges would pick out the 10 that they felt were the best. Then the finals would be held among these 10 people. The semi-finals and finals would last for half a month. In other words, they had to stay in France for half a month. Shi Mengwan knew about this before. Although she didn't know what the next 2 topics were, she was confident in herself. Little Ji was booked into a hotel near the competition venue. Little Ji shared a room with Tong Yin. Shi Mengwan's room was right next to theirs. After entering the door, she motioned for them to rest for a while. She wanted to take a shower and change her clothes. When the door closed, Shi Mengwan was left alone. She finally didn't have to hide her emotions anymore. Throwing herself on the bed, Shi Mengwan's mood was extremely low. The afternoon of the second day Shi Mengwan arrived was the time to announce the theme of the semi-finals. After the announcement, all the contestants would be given 3 days to submit their works. 3 days later, the judges would use 1 day to vote and announce the list of people who had passed the semi-finals. Then, the submission time for the finalists was 7 days. The time given to the designer was quite short. Therefore, the organizing committee of the semi-finals did not require the contestants to design the finished product. Instead, they only required the contestants to draw the design. However, the works to be submitted in the finals included the design drawings, the source of the design, and the finished product. Of course, all the materials needed for the finals would be provided by the organizing committee. When Shi Mengwan appeared in front of Xiao Ji and Tong Yin again, she looked radiant again. She put on makeup and went to the organizing committee to fill in the form and get back the theme. The theme of this season is sweet. When she saw this theme, Shi Mengwan felt a little dizzy. She couldn't be sweet at all now. After she came to France, it wasn't that she hadn't thought of calling Jean Hauser. She wanted to ask him what was going on. How could he be engaged to another woman? But her dignity didn't allow her to ask. She retracted her thoughts and looked at the requirements on the design theme. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. Was it sweet? 3 o'clock was very tight. It was so tight that Shi Mengwan didn't have time to think about why Jean Hauser was engaged to another woman. In the past 3 days, she had hardly left her room. Every day she had been drawing. After 3 days, Shi Mengwan submitted the design draft. Before the judges voted, Shi Mengwan, who was extremely tired, told Tong Yin and Xiao Ji not to disturb her, and slept for the whole day. Later, she was woken up by a knock on the door. She got up and looked at the time. It was already nighttime. She had slept for a while, and her spirit had recovered quite well. It was just that she felt hungry after sleeping for too long. She was thinking about going downstairs to eat something later, when there was a knock on the door again. She thought it was Xiao Ji or Tong Yin. She didn't expect to open the door and see Wan Xianying standing outside. It's you. Shi Mengwan had just woken up. Her hair was messy, and her clothes were a little wrinkled. In such a state, it was completely unsuitable for her to meet guests. She resisted the urge to close the door and took a small step back. Good evening, Mingwan. Hello. Sure, Mingwan's expression didn't look that good. What's the matter? Wan Xianying stood at the door. Aren't you going to invite me in for a seat? It's not convenient. Sure, Mingwan's words were a little heartless. Looking at Wan Xianying, it was obvious that he had come to look for her. Okay, it's fine. Wan Xianying wasn't angry. He placed his hand behind him. On it was a bouquet of extremely beautiful heart-shaped roses. Sure, Mingwan was a little embarrassed. Wan Xianying. Flowers for a beauty. Wan Xianying forcefully handed the flowers to Sure Mingwan. You haven't eaten, have you? If you don't mind, how about having dinner with me? Sure Mingwan wanted to refuse, but Wan Xianying spoke slyly. I asked the waiter. They said that you haven't gone downstairs all day. You didn't order food either, so you should be hungry, right? Sure Mingwan's brows furrowed, but Wan Xianying seemed to know what she was thinking. I'm sorry, I made my own decision. However, the owner of this hotel is a friend of mine, so he gave me some convenience. His attitude was quite sincere. Sure Mingwan couldn't even find a reason to refuse. There's no hurry. Wan Xianying was quite gentlemanly. I'll wait for you. As he spoke, he took the initiative to take a step back. With a faint smile on his face, he raised his hand gently and gestured for Sure Mingwan to help herself. Sure Mingwan closed the door in a dilemma. She looked at the large bouquet of roses in her hand and placed it on the coffee table. After staring at the bouquet of flowers for nearly a minute, Sure Mingwan suddenly smiled. Forget it, it was just a meal. Moreover, Wan Xianying was Hu Jiniao's childhood friend. She would have a meal with him, and then explain things clearly. Even if she wasn't with Zhang Haoze, she didn't have the intention to start a new relationship for the time being. He cleaned himself up as fast as he could and changed his clothes. When Sure Mingwan came out of the room, she was not surprised to see Wan Xianying's stunned gaze. How about French food? Wan Xianying suggested. Sure Mingwan felt that it was too long, but Wan Xianying smiled. You came to France to participate in the competition. I think you haven't tried authentic French food during this period of time, right? Sure Mingwan indeed hadn't. She realized that Wan Xianying was indeed a businessman. His ability to be watertight was even better than Xiao Qi's. Let's go. I know there's a Michelin-starred restaurant that tastes pretty good. It's nearby. Half an hour later, Sure Mingwan and Wan Xianying sat in the restaurant. The environment in front of them was quite good. Sure Mingwan's nervous mood these few days was more or less relaxed because of this elegant environment. I came to France that year and accidentally discovered this restaurant. Later, as long as I came to France, I would definitely come. Sure Mingwan heard Wan Xianying speak French to the waiter quite well. Her French wasn't very good, so she could only understand some simple greetings. Do you come to France often? He spoke French so fluently. Often. Wan Xianying nodded and moved his body slightly closer. Do you know why? Sure Mingwan shook her head. She knew that Hu Jiniao was very rich. His friend wasn't a simple person. I told you last time that our family is in the antique business. You also know that over the years, there have been a lot of treasures in our country that have been lost outside. So every time there's an auction here, I'll come over. Sure Mingwan looked at Wan Xianying, and her impression of him changed. I didn't know that you were quite patriotic. How should I put it? Those patriotic overseas Chinese are very dedicated to these things. So I'll do my best. Sure Mingwan nodded. She wasn't familiar with Wan Xianying, and Wan Xianying didn't mention what had happened before. He only talked about some of the things he had encountered at the auction. This was a field that Sure Mingwan had never come into contact with before. It was quite new to her. For a moment, she actually felt that listening to Wan Xianying's words was quite interesting. French cuisine was famous for taking a long time. Sure Mingwan didn't feel bored after eating the meal. Her nerves, which hadn't been able to relax from rushing to draw, were also relaxed a lot because of this delicious meal. After coming out of the restaurant, Sure Mingwan looked at Wan Xianying and thanked him very seriously. Wan Xianying, thank you. Thank me for what? Wan Xianying looked at her with a mischievous smile in his eyes. Thank me for treating you to a meal? You don't have to thank me. You can treat me tomorrow. Okay. Sure Mingwan didn't refuse. She should have treated him back. The weather is good today. Do you want to take a walk? Sure, Mengwan wanted to refuse, but Wan Xianying made a gesture of invitation. She thought for a moment and followed beside him. Okay. The temperature in Paris was still very low at this season. It was only in the teens. Lin City was already in the 30s. But Paris was so cold. Sure, Mengwan really wasn't used to it. Tightening the coat on her body, Sure, Mengwan couldn't be happy when she thought that she would have to stay here for a few more days. Mengwan. Wan Xianying took off his windbreaker and was about to put it on her. Sure, Mengwan was shocked and subconsciously took a step back. Wan Xianying's action of holding the coat stopped in midair. He looked at Sure Mengwan as if he knew that he was being abrupt. Sorry, I just thought that you would be cold. I'm not cold. Sure, Mengwan felt that it was time to make things clear to Wan Xianying. Wan Xianying. She stood at the intersection and looked at his face under the street lamp. Seriously speaking, Wan Xianying wasn't bad looking, had good qualifications, and was a good person. But sometimes feelings really couldn't be explained clearly. Wan Xianying. I know that it might not be appropriate for me to say this. You might even think that I'm being self-sentimental. But I really want to say that the two of us aren't suitable. Wan Xianying didn't expect her to be so direct. He was a little surprised. But after the surprise, there was a faint smile on his face. Are you rejecting me? I guess so. Sure, Mengwan nodded. I just don't want you to waste time on me. You're not me. How do you know that I'm wasting time? But I don't like you. Sure, Mengwan was very direct. Her personality was like this. If she liked him, then she liked him. If she didn't like him, then she didn't like him. Wan Xianying took a step forward and looked at Sure Mengwan's face. Before he came, he specially asked Su Qingseng to do his homework and asked a lot of people. Everything that happened today, whether it was what flowers to send or where to eat, he had carefully arranged everything. However, he didn't expect such a result. You don't like me, but I like you. I think that's enough. Maybe one day you'll like me? That's impossible. Sure, Mengwan's words were quite absolute. Wan Xianying looked at her. Do you have someone you like? Yes. Do I know him? No. Wan Xianying looked at her and suddenly said, You didn't deliberately make up such a person to make me give up, did you? No. Sure, Mengwan didn't want to say more. Anyway, I have someone I like. I can't forget him in a short period of time, so don't waste time on me. There's something wrong with your argument. Wan Xianying waved his hand and didn't take her words to heart at all. If I don't succeed with you in the end, it'll be a waste of time. But if I move you in the end and you get together with me, it'll be worth it. How can it be a waste of time? Wan Xianying. Sure, Mengwan was speechless by his words. All right, it's getting late. I'll send you back to rest. Wan Xianying. Let's go. Wan Xianying obviously didn't want to listen to her, so Sure Mengwan didn't say anything else. The two of them walked back along the road. Wan Xianying looked at the hotel building not far away in front of them. His attitude was different from yesterday. When they were about to reach the hotel, Sure Mengwan's foot suddenly tripped over something, and she was about to fall. Wan Xianying supported her body in time. Are you okay? I'm fine. Sure Mengwan stood firm and was glad that she didn't wear high heels today. Thank you. Mengwan, you don't have to be so polite to me. Wan Xianying was serious for a while before he became a little sloppy again. Sure, Mengwan seemed to be used to him being like this, so she wasn't very surprised. She stood properly and didn't refuse when Wan Xianying said that he wanted to send her back to her room. Mengwan, can I still come to see you tomorrow? I have something to do tomorrow. Tomorrow was the announcement of the shortlist. Only 10 people could be shortlisted. 1 week after the shortlist, she could bring 2 assistants to the venue specially arranged for the finalists. Whether she could be shortlisted or not, she would only know tomorrow. If she could, then she would naturally be busy next. If she couldn't, then she would really be free. It's okay. I know you're here for the competition. I can wait for you to finish the competition. Sure, Mengwan didn't reply. After saying goodbye to Wan Xianying, she entered the room. She walked to the sofa and sat down. Looking at the big bouquet of roses, her emotions were very complicated. She couldn't help but think of Jean Hauser again. During the time she was with him, Jean Hauze didn't seem to have given her roses. She sighed in her heart. Actually, it didn't matter what he gave her. It was only at this time that she could tell that Jean Hauze really didn't have her in his heart. Otherwise, why would he be engaged to another woman? She got up to take a shower and rest. There was a knock on the door. She thought it was Wan Xianying who had returned. Without much hesitation, she went forward and opened the door. When she saw who the tall figure outside the door was, she closed the door without hesitation. However, her movements were still a beat too slow. Before she closed the door, Jean Hauze entered the door first. Without saying a word, Shi Mingwan began to push her away, trying to push her out. Jean Hauze easily pulled her hands into his arms and turned around. At the same time the door was closed, her body was also pressed against the door. Shi Mingwan was anxious. She raised her foot and kicked Jean Hauze. Jean Hauze held her hand and wanted to block her foot. She struggled very hard. So he wasn't paying attention and was actually kicked by her. After the kick, Shi Mingwan used even more force. She raised her other foot and kicked him. Although she wasn't wearing high heels, she was wearing a pair of pointed shoes today. It was also very painful to kick someone. Jean Hauze was kicked twice by her. When she was about to kick him for the third time, he lifted her body up. In 3 steps, he carried her body to the side of the bed and threw her down. The soft bed made Shi Mingwan's body bounce a few times. Just as she steadied herself, she raised her foot and kicked his body again. Shi Mingwan, what are you doing? Even Jean Hauze couldn't help but press down on her body. He pressed down tightly and didn't let her move anymore. He held her hands together and raised them above his head, looking into her eyes. What are you doing? He had been very busy during this period of time. When he had some time to look for her, he realized that Shi Mingwan wasn't at home. She had gone abroad to participate in some competition. Am I messing around? Yes, if I'm messing around, you can go find someone who doesn't mess around. Shi Mingwan glared at him with a gloomy gaze. Jean Hauze, get lost. I don't want to see you. Jean Hauze's brows were tightly furrowed. Looking at the anger on Shi Mingwan's face, he seemed to be a little puzzled. Are you angry that I haven't come to see you during this period of time? Who's angry? Shi Mingwan didn't want to talk to him anymore. I don't have time to be angry with you. Get out of the way. I said, I don't want to see you. Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan closed her eyes. Yes, she should have understood long ago. Look at how Jean Hauze addressed her. He had always called her by her full name. Did he really have feelings for her? Did he really like her? Did he really love her? I'll say it again. Jean Hauze, get out. Chapter 676. I do. Jean Hauze didn't believe her at all. He only felt that Shi Mingwan's actions were because he hadn't come to see her for a long time and was throwing a tantrum. Call me. This person. Really? Shi Mingwan suddenly pressed the 3 numbers. After pressing it, the moment the call was connected, she spoke in fluent English. Hello, I'm at XX Hotel, room 13. Before she could finish her sentence, the phone was snatched away by Jean Hauze. He looked at her and couldn't believe that she was serious. Shi Mingwan, do you know what you're doing? Of course I know what I'm doing. It's someone who doesn't know what I'm doing. It's you. She glared at Jean Hauze. She had been suppressing her uncomfortable emotions for the past few days. At this moment, she didn't want to suppress them anymore. Jean Hauze, is it fun to be two-timing? Is it fun to bully me like this? As she spoke, the great anger from when she knew that he was engaged surged in her heart. Without thinking, she raised her foot and kicked him again. Jean Hauze, who was shocked by Shi Mingwan's words just now, was still thinking about her words. He didn't pay attention and actually let Shi Mingwan kick him. Jean Hauze was kicked and had no choice but to leave her body. Shi Mingwan took this opportunity to quickly get up from the bed and dodged to the side. She sat up and looked at Jean Hauze with a defensive expression and resentment. Jean Hauze, you can't bully me like this. Perhaps because she had suppressed it for too long, Shi Mingwan's tone was filled with grievance. But very quickly, she suppressed this grievance. Let bygones be bygones. But now, she didn't want to continue like this. Leave. I don't want to see you. As she spoke, she pointed at the door, wanting Jean Hauze to get lost. Jean Hauze sat on the bed and didn't move, his brows furrowed slightly, as if he had thought of something. To timing? Who? At this time, he was still playing dumb. Shi Mengwan nodded, and went forward to take the phone. After taking the phone, she quickly retreated, as if she wasn't afraid that Jean Hauze would pounce on her. She turned on the phone and found yesterday's news. She directly placed it in front of Jean Hauze. On the phone screen, Jean Hauze stood with Chen Feifei, while Chen Yongchang stood beside Chen Feifei. The three of them smiled brightly. The accompanying article was the news of their engagement. Shi Mengwan's gaze was slightly cold as she stared straight at Jean Hauze. Now that things had come to this, what else could he say? He said that there was nothing between him and Chen Feifei. He asked her to give him time. She believed him, gave him time. And the result? Jean Hauze's eyes darkened when he saw the photo. He knew about this photo. He also knew about this news, but he didn't expect Shi Mengwan to see it. Nothing to say. If you have nothing else to say, then leave. She didn't want to hear it from him either. It was true that she longed for love, and wanted to be with him. But she didn't want to be looked down upon. She didn't want to be a shameful mistress. Even if according to the chronological order, she should have arrived first. She casually threw her phone aside. Shi Mengwan still had things to do tomorrow, so she didn't want to waste her time with Jean Hauze. Leave. Jean Hauze got up and got out of bed. Shi Mengwan thought that he was going to leave, but he walked to her side and hugged her. Jean Hauze. He didn't want to use this trick all the time. Shi Mengwan struggled up and raised her foot to kick Jean Hauze again. He dodged this kick, and Shi Mengwan used her elbow to hit his abdomen. She heard a muffled groan. She didn't stop. She didn't use much strength. What was he doing? However, when she saw Jean Hauze bend down, she thought he was pretending. Jean Hauze, go out. I don't want to see you. Jean Hauze didn't say anything. His hand kept covering his abdomen, and his face seemed to be in pain. Shi Mengwan was still calm at first, but when she saw that he was really in pain, she couldn't hold back the coldness on her face anymore. Stop pretending. If you're fine, go out. I don't want to see you. Jean Hauze shook his head. He reached out to hug her. Only then did Shi Mengwan remember the situation in front of her, and pushed him hard again. He was pushed back a step by her, and his back hit the edge of the table in the hotel room. Shi Mengwan's lips moved. She wanted to say that she should be careful, but she thought that she didn't have much strength at all. He must be pretending. But when she saw the blood flowing out from between Jean Hauze's fingers, she was shocked, and went forward without thinking. Are you hurt? Jean Hauze raised his head and looked at her. Ignoring the blood on his body, he reached out and hugged her. Jean Hauze, what was he doing at a time like this? I'm not engaged to her. Although everyone thought that way, this engagement was the wishful thinking of the Chen father and daughter. In the past half a month, there had been frequent movements. Some were aimed at him, and some were aimed at Chen Feifei. It was fine to target Chen Feifei, but there was only one. After all, Chen Feifei's uncle was quite powerful in Xi province. However, there were many movements aimed at him. Before he decided to come to France, half of it was because he did it on purpose, and the other half was because he wanted to divert the other party's attention. Therefore, when the other party came looking for him, he didn't avoid it. Instead, he directly accepted the other party's provocation. He deliberately took the knife in his stomach. The strength and direction were calculated accurately. It wouldn't be fatal, but he would suffer a little. Sure enough, after he was injured, the other party's movements immediately stopped. He probably didn't expect him to be so weak that he would be injured so easily. It was also because he was injured that the other party's movements stopped. That was why he had the time to come to France to look for Shi Mengwan. However, he didn't expect Shi Mengwan to have such a reaction when he came. Where are you hurt? Shi Mengwan didn't want to care about whether he was engaged or not. She remembered that he was very skilled. Ordinary people shouldn't be able to hurt him. So how did he get injured? It's a small injury. Since it's a small injury, let's go. Shi Mengwan retreated from his arms and didn't look at him at all. Get out. Jean Hauze let go of his hand and looked at his abdomen. He came to France and was wearing a casual suit. Inside was a beige shirt. The shirt was already stained with blood, and blood leaked out from between his fingers. Shi Mingwan turned her face away and wanted to say, "Get out again." However, her absent-minded mind took a step forward and walked in front of Jean Hauser. She bent down and took Jean Hauser's hand away. She unbuttoned his shirt. She saw that there was a circle of gauze wrapped around his abdomen. The gauze was now completely red. She pursed her lips into a straight line and stared at the wound for a long time. She turned around and pressed the front desk to ask them to send the first aid kit up. When the other party asked if he needed a doctor, she thought about it and agreed. When the doctor came, she asked Jean Hauser to lie down. "Don't stand. Lie down. The doctor will be here later. You're not going to chase me away." Jean Hauser's words made Shi Mingwan look sideways. She stared at his face for a long time and finally shook her head. "After the doctor sees your injury, you can leave. Wan." Jean Hauser's address made Shi Mingwan's heart tremble. It seemed that ever since the two of them got together, he hadn't called her name like this. "I'm not engaged to Chen Feifei." Shi Mingwan lowered her head in disbelief. Jean Hauser took 2 steps forward to approach her, but she raised her hand. "Don't move. Lie down." The worry in her eyes was too obvious. Jean Hauser looked at her for a while, then finally listened to her and lay down on the bed. His hand was still pressed on the wound. It was no longer bleeding. Soon, the hotel waiter brought a doctor up. Shi Mingwan was worried that Jean Hauser's injury was too serious, and that she wouldn't be able to handle it well. When the doctor arrived, she heaved a sigh of relief. The doctor untied the gauze on Jean Hauser's waist. Only then did Shi Mingwan see that there was a wound about 5 centimeters long on his abdomen. The wound had already been stitched up, but it was still bleeding faintly. She wasn't sure if it was because she had pushed him just now or something else. At this moment her eyes were a little red. The doctor treated Jean Hauser's wound again and bandaged it. Finally, he gave some instructions on what to take note of. What surprised Shi Mingwan was that Jean Hauser could actually speak fluent French. This made her unable to help but look sideways. After sending the doctor away, Shi Mingwan asked the waiter to change the blood-stained bedsheets. She looked at Jean Hauser and wanted to chase him away. Jean Hauser had already laid down on the bed first. Shi Mingwan took 2 steps forward. "Jean Hauser, you can't sleep here. You, Wan." Jean Hauser reached out and held her hand. He looked at her with his usual cold face, but there was a hint of gentleness and fatigue in his eyes. "I'm very tired." During this period of time, apart from those people who wanted to deal with him in the open and in the dark, he had also suffered a lot of interference in his work. Whether it was in Lin City or Qing City, he still had a lot of things to do. However, because he hadn't seen her for a long time, he ignored the injuries on his body and flew for more than 10 hours to see her. He didn't rest on the plane. Instead, he dealt with some very important business matters first. This time he was really tired. "Wan, let me sleep for a while." When he said this, Shi Mingwan finally noticed that other than the injuries on his body, there was a faint shadow under his eyes. Her lips moved. She wanted herself to be more heartless and harden her heart, but she couldn't do it no matter what. She could only watch as Jean Hauser closed his eyes. His hand was still holding her hand. "Sleep with me for a while, okay?" Jean Hauser didn't even open his eyes. He just held Shi Mingwan's hand and didn't let go. Shi Mingwan stood by the bed and looked at Jean Hauser, who seemed to have lost a little weight. She didn't sleep as he wished. Instead, she withdrew her hand and took a step back. Jean Hauser looked at her with half-opened eyes. At this moment, Jean Hauser unexpectedly made Shi Mingwan feel fragile. Fragile? How was that possible? That was definitely not an emotion that should appear on Jean Hauser. In her heart, this person was similar to a robot. How could he be fragile? "Wan," he called her again. This time, Shi Mingwan decided not to be affected by him. She turned around and went straight to the bathroom. Her footsteps were very fast. After entering the bathroom, she quickly closed the door. She placed her hands on the edge of the sink and stared at her face in the mirror. "Don't be soft-hearted. Don't believe it. That man was already someone else's now. If you were soft-hearted, it would be equivalent to harming yourself again. No, absolutely not." Shi Mingwan was in a bad mood. She took more than 10 minutes to take a shower than usual before coming out. She was wrapped in a hotel bathrobe. When she saw Jean Hauser, his eyes were tightly closed. His breathing was long and balanced, as if he had really fallen asleep. Shi Mengwan walked to the bedside and stood still, staring at Jean Hauser's face. Many thoughts flashed through her mind, such as shaking him awake and telling him to leave. Or perhaps she simply went to get another room. However, when she saw the injury on Jean Hauser's abdomen, she temporarily put down those thoughts and suppressed them. She closed her eyes and finally lay down beside him helplessly. She stared at the side of Jean Hauser's face, unable to calm down. Shi Mengwan thought that she wouldn't be able to sleep, and she also thought that she would toss and turn for the whole night. But in reality, she slept very soundly. No matter how much she didn't want to deny it, she couldn't escape the reality in her heart. Where Jean Hauser was, she could always sleep more peacefully. Early morning, Shi Mengwan woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw Jean Hauser's enlarged face in front of her. He was staring at her. At the same time that she woke up, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. Shi Mengwan subconsciously avoided him. She looked at him and moved her body to the side. Jean Hauser supported himself with one hand on the bed. He looked at her movements and moved a little in her direction. Shi Mengwan quickly got up and sat 2 arms away from him. Her gaze shifted slightly to prevent herself from looking at him. Your injury should be fine now. You can leave. Shi Mengwan didn't plan to continue like this. Her body moved, but before she could leave, she was already pressed down by Jean Hauser. In the next second, she was pressed down by him. Wan, I'm not engaged. He looked into her eyes and said very seriously. His eyes were deep and focused. To her, they were fatally attractive. She knew that what he said might not be the truth, and she didn't intend to believe him. She wanted to struggle, but when she thought that Jean Hauser was injured, she could only stop. Really? Does it have anything to do with me? Shi Mengwan forced herself to turn her face away. Who are you to me? Whether you're engaged or not, and which woman you're with, you don't need to tell me. Jean Hauser's brows furrowed slightly. Wan, don't call me. Shi Mengwan seemed to have made up her mind. She turned around and looked at him. Jean Hauser, you said that you're not engaged? Yes. You said that you have nothing to do with Chen Feifei? Yes. Then tell me, who am I to you? Jean Hauser paused for a moment and looked at Shi Mengwan's delicate and beautiful face. He said 3 words very slowly, girlfriend. I'm your girlfriend? Yes. Was she not? Okay. You said I'm your girlfriend. Shi Mengwan suddenly reached out to hold his face and looked into his eyes very seriously. Then, do you dare to publicize our relationship? Publicize it to the entire Lin City. Tell everyone that you're my man and I'm your woman? Do you dare? Do you dare to let everyone know that I'm your girlfriend? Chapter 677. In a quiet room, 2 men were lying on the same bed. One was on top, and the other was on bottom. The posture was ambiguous, but the atmosphere was completely different. Jean Hauser didn't expect Shi Mengwan to ask such a question. The air suddenly became silent. He still had an injury on his abdomen. After supporting himself like this for a long time, it caused a slight throbbing pain. His expression changed slightly because of the pain. In Shi Mengwan's eyes, this change directly became proof that he didn't want to admit his identity. Shi Mengwan sneered. It seemed that she was no exception to this result. She let go of her hand and gently pushed him to the side. She was about to get up when Jean Hauser grabbed her hand again. Wan, let go. It's not what you think. Jean Hauser rarely explained to others. His brothers had been with him for a long time. There were many things that he didn't need to say or explain. They would directly execute them, and very few people would question his words. Then what is it? Tell me, I'll listen. Shi Mengwan waited for him to explain. Even if she really wanted to be with him, she hoped that she could understand his thoughts. Even if they couldn't be together, she hoped that the breakup could be done cleanly. Jean Hauser had been supporting himself for a long time. At this moment, he simply sat up and pulled her to sit up with him. His movements affected his wound. He snorted in a very low voice. Shi Mengwan seemed to have only realized at this moment that Jean Hauser was injured. She turned her face away and forced herself not to soften and not to give in. Wan, I can't disclose our relationship for the time being. Shi Mengwan sneered and turned her face away. She felt that it was a matter of course. She knew that this person was just saying it to sound nice. I'm sorry. Zhang Haoze rarely said sorry to anyone. There were even fewer women who could make him say sorry. Zhang Haoze thought of Zhang Kuan, the Zhang family in Qing City, and his current situation. He closed his eyes. Chen Feifei has heart disease. She can't stand stimulation. I owe her father a debt of gratitude. So, I can't leave the Chen family for the time being. Shi Mengwan turned around and looked at Zhang Haoze. She just stared at him. She has heart disease. She likes you and wants to be engaged to you, so you agreed? I didn't agree. In fact, ever since Chen Feifei had a relapse, Chen Yongchang had been wanting them to get engaged. But he didn't agree. He didn't want to agree either. But later, Chen Feifei was almost attacked. Chen Feifei was scared half to death because of this. Her heart wasn't good to begin with, so Chen Yongchang decided to get them engaged. But perhaps she was afraid that he would be unhappy if he knew. Chen Yongchang didn't tell him. Instead, he said that the Chen Corporation was holding an anniversary meeting. The Chen Corporation's anniversary celebration was around the same time. As the general manager of the Chen Corporation, it was impossible for Zhang Haoze not to attend. When he went to Juanxia, he found out that Chen Yongchang and Chen Feifei actually wanted them to get engaged to him, and they didn't reveal any news between them. At that time, it was impossible for Zhang Haoze to leave just like that, so when Chen Yongchang asked him to go on stage, he could only go up. After that, Chen Yongchang said a lot of good things to him in private. After explaining for a long time, he finally said that if he really didn't want to, he could wait until Chen Feifei's body got better, and then break off the engagement with her. As for the current situation, it was better to let Chen Feifei rest well and recuperate. This way, even if Zhang Haoze didn't agree, it would still cause the fact that they were engaged. But in his heart he didn't agree. Wan, it's not what you think between me and her. I understand it's not what I think. It's just that you want to repay her kindness. At this point Shi Mengwan sneered. But Zhang Haoze, the Chen family is kind to you. Chen Feifei has heart disease. What does that have to do with me? Since you pity her so much and can't bear to part with her, then you can go to her side and take good care of her. Why are you looking for me? Wan, do you know what your behavior is called? Shi Mengwan said bluntly. A scumbag. Shi Mengwan. Zhang Haoze looked at her, his face full of disapproval. Shi Mengwan smiled, but that smile didn't reach her eyes at all. Aren't you a scumbag? You're afraid of hurting Chen Feifei, but you're still hanging on to me? Do I owe you? Why should I swallow my anger like this? Or is it that in your heart, I'm so easy to deceive, that I can let you do whatever you want? I didn't mean that. But you've already done it. Shi Mengwan's face was full of mockery, and she didn't give in at all. Aren't you afraid of hurting Chen Feifei while hanging on to me? Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mengwan and didn't explain. In fact, he couldn't explain. Because of the real reason, he couldn't let her know at all. I'm not afraid of hurting Chen Feifei. I just don't want to be an ungrateful person. The Chen family is kind to me. Although I don't like Chen Feifei, I don't want anything to happen to her. Yes, you can't let anything happen to her, so you can let something happen to me. Shi Mengwan couldn't take it anymore. She turned around and was about to get off the bed when Zhang Haoze held her hand. Don't do this. Then what do you want me to do? Shi Mengwan shook his hand off. Accept the truth. Accept the fact that you have to take care of another woman's emotions when you're with me? I didn't. Don't say you didn't mean that. Just tell me directly, how long do you plan to take care of her? How long do you plan to hide our relationship? Zhang Haoze didn't avoid this question. Instead, he looked at Shi Mengwan very seriously. It won't be too long. Give me some time, I'll solve it. Unfortunately, I don't believe you. Zhang Haoze's face darkened because of her words. Shi Mengwan didn't want to continue. She left the bed and stood on the other side of the bed. Alright, that's it. Zhang Haoze, you go your own way, and I'll go my own way. He liked to take care of Chen Feifei, so he would take care of her. She wasn't going to accompany him anymore. She still had to go to the organizing committee to see the results of the semifinals today, so she didn't have time to waste with Jean Hauser here. After entering the bathroom, she washed up and changed her clothes. Shi Mingwan came out and prepared to leave. Jean Hauser stood up at this moment. Wanwan, alright Jean Hauser. He had already said a lot today. Don't say any more. Either you break up with me, and we won't have anything to do with each other, or you stay away from Chen Feifei. Go back to Lin City and announce that you're not engaged. Everything is a misunderstanding. How about that? Jean Hauser's face darkened. At this time he couldn't do that. While he was silent and hesitant, Shi Mingwan had already picked up her bag and walked to the door. When she was about to leave, Jean Hauser stood in front of her again. Wan, Jean Hauser, I'll say it again. Either you do what you promised me, or you leave this place. There is no third option. Her hand rose, and she thought about pushing him away. The moment she raised her hand, she thought of the tattoo on his body. Gritting her teeth, she walked right past him and left. This time, Jean Hauser didn't stop her. When she got out of the door, she was relieved, but at the same time, she felt a sense of loss. She believed what Jean Hauser said was true. He was such a proud person that he disdained to lie. But so what if what he said was true? What could it change? Chen Feifei had heart disease and needed him to take care of her. She was not in good health. Did he have to take care of her all the time? Take care of him one day at a time, and 1 year at a time. He really valued relationships. Unfortunately, she didn't want to waste her time with him. Sister Shi, you're up so early? Just as she went out, Xiao Ji and Tong Yin had already woken up and were here. Sister Shi, are you very nervous? I'm not nervous. Shi Mingwan shook her head. Compared to what she was worried about, there was really nothing to be nervous about. If we can pass, then we'll pass. If we can't, then we'll just play for a few days as a vacation. Thinking about it this way, there's nothing bad about it. Sister Shi, your mentality is really good. Xiao Ji almost wanted to worship her. Shi Mingwan smiled, and her depressed mood was suppressed again. Let's go. What surprised Shi Mingwan was that she actually passed the semifinals. Among the 10 finalists, she was in the 9th place, as it was said that the rankings were not separated. This was really great news for her. Xiao Ji and Tong Yin were extremely happy. The two of them hugged her and congratulated her repeatedly. Shi Mingwan smiled. This was what they meant by frustrated in love, but successful in career. Right? She passed the semifinals. Next, the 10 people who passed were ready to participate in the finals. We've already prepared the venue for the finals. For the next 7 days, you need to stay in the place we've prepared. You'll draw here, make the finished product, and walk until you've finished your work. Because the venue is a little far, you can go back and pack your things now. Gather here in the afternoon. We'll have a car to send you to the venue. The people from the organizing committee explained the rules again. Shi Mingwan, Xiao Ji, and the others all memorized it very seriously. After memorizing it, they decided to go back to the hotel to pack their luggage first, and then come over to gather in the afternoon. Shi Mingwan, Xiao Ji, and the others returned to the hotel. Xiao Ji stood at the door of the room and looked at Shi Mingwan. Sister Shi, do you want us to help you pack? No need. Shi Mingwan shook her head. You guys go pack your things. We'll go out for a meal later. Okay, Sister Shi. It's still early anyway. We can come back after dinner and rest for a while. Shi Mingwan nodded. Now, she just didn't know where the organizing committee would arrange for them. After entering the door, Shi Mingwan thought that Jean Hauser had already left. She didn't expect him to still be in the room. Seeing that he hadn't left yet, Shi Mingwan's expression didn't look too good. Why haven't you left yet? Jean Hauser stood up. Wan, don't call me. Shi Mingwan took a step back. Just as she was about to open the door and let him leave, someone knocked on the door first. Shi Mingwan was shocked. She stood at the door and wasn't in a hurry to open it. Instead, she looked out through the peephole. Chapter 678. Shi Mingwan's body was pressed against the door. Wan Xianying was outside, and Jean Hauser was inside. She was a little confused. Her only thought was that she couldn't let the two of them meet. Turning around, she suddenly faced John House's approaching body. It was rare for her to feel a little nervous. What do you want?" After asking this question, Shi Mingwan realized how stupid her question was. She almost bit her tongue off. "John Hause, go to the bathroom and hide for a while." John Hause narrowed his eyes and looked at her without moving at all. "John Hause." There was another knock on the door. Shi Mingwan's eyes were a little anxious. She started to reach out to push him. However, considering that he was injured, she didn't use too much strength. John Hause suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her heavily on the lips. Shi Mingwan sucked in a breath of cold air. But he took advantage of this moment to barge in. He forcefully plundered her. It seemed like it had been a long time since he kissed her like this. John House's heart was moved, and he couldn't control himself. His kiss had always been irresistible to her. Before long, she was completely immersed in his kiss. She wrapped her hands around the back of his waist and slowly moved up. There were a few more knocks on the door, and Shi Mingwan came back to her senses from John House's kiss. She pushed hard and John Hause took 2 steps back. Shi Mingwan stood there and kept adjusting her breathing. "John Hause, if you plan to let others know that you're with me now, you can continue." John Hause didn't continue. He looked deeply at Shi Mingwan, then nodded and turned to enter the bathroom. Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief. She was really afraid that John Hause would continue regardless. After all, not many people knew them in this foreign country. Taking a deep breath, she turned to open the door. Wan Xianying, who was outside the door, smiled when he saw her. He handed a bouquet of flowers to her with a faint smile on his face. "Congratulations. You." Shi Mingwan looked at the bouquet of flowers and wasn't in a hurry to take it. Wan Xianying took a step forward and gestured for her to accept the flowers. "Why? You passed the semifinals and entered the finals. Isn't it worth being happy about?" "Thank you." Shi Mingwan took the flowers. Wan Xianying looked at her face, and his gaze fell on her body. Her clothes were a little messy, but he couldn't tell if he didn't look closely. His gaze shifted upwards and landed on the other party's lips. Wan Xianying narrowed his eyes slightly. It was only for a moment before he quickly put on a smile. "What? Aren't you going to invite me in?" This was not convenient at all. Shi Mingwan looked at the bouquet of flowers in her hand, but she couldn't refuse. "Please come in. You don't have to be so polite." Wan Xianying entered the door and quickly scanned the room. He didn't see anyone. Finally, he glanced in the direction of the bathroom and sat down on the sofa in the room. "That's right, you've passed the semifinals. Next should be the finals, right? I heard that you guys are going to complete your work in isolation? You even know this?" Shi Mingwan was indeed a little surprised. "I have a friend in the committee, so one more question." Wan Xianying looked at her with a cautious expression. "You won't be angry, right?" "I won't." This competition was no secret. In order to ensure fairness, the officials had already announced the process. "Are you guys going in the afternoon? Why don't I send you there?" "There's no need." Shi Mingwan refused without thinking. "I brought my assistant over. She has arranged a car. We'll go together when the time comes." "All right then." Wan Xianying looked at her. "How many days are you going? I'll pick you guys up and celebrate for you. Is that okay? We still don't know how the results are. It's too early to celebrate." In such a competition with so many experts, Shi Mingwan didn't dare to think that she could get into the top 3. She was already very happy to be able to enter the semifinals. "I have confidence in you. You'll definitely get a very good ranking." Wan Xianying was much more confident in her. "Maybe you can even get first place. Don't joke around." Shi Mingwan looked at the list of people who came to participate this time, especially those who made it into the top 10. She even paid attention today. Masters wouldn't come to such a competition, but there were many newcomers with good results. She was just a small studio. It was already her luck to be able to make it into the top 10. "Don't think that way. In my heart, you're number 1. Wan Xianying's words were equivalent to saying sweet nothings. Shi Mingwan didn't reply. "Do you have anything else? Are you asking me to leave?" "No, I still have to pack my things." Xiao Ji and the others will come to find me later. Then you're still chasing me away. Wan Xianying. Alright, I'll leave, okay? Wan Xianying stood up as he spoke. When he passed by Shi Mengwan, he stopped. If you need to pack your things, I won't disturb you anymore. However, I still hope that I can celebrate with you if I have the chance. Thank you. Wan Xianying continued to walk out. When he passed by the bathroom door, he glanced there seemingly unintentionally. Shi Mengwan's heart instantly skipped a beat. She took a few steps and opened the door first. Wan Xianying had already walked to the door. When he saw her actions, he smiled helplessly. You really can't wait to chase me away. I'm really hurt when you're like this. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment, but Wan Xianying moved his body forward a little. In order to calm my hurt heart, why don't you give me a comforting kiss? Shi Mengwan was shocked by his actions, but Wan Xianying suddenly smiled. Alright, I won't tease you anymore. Come on. Compete well. I wish you a good ranking. Okay. Thank you. Shi Mengwan's expression wasn't as casual as before. Even though Wan Xianying had expressed his intention to leave, her eyes were still a little guarded. That look made Wan Xianying sigh in his heart. Sister-in-law's best friend was really not easy to get close to. However, when he stepped out of the room, he unintentionally glanced in the direction of the bathroom again. Why did he feel that the door seemed to have moved just now? However, before he could see clearly, Shi Mengwan had already quickly closed the door. After Wan Xianying left, Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief. However, just as she turned around, she saw Zhang Haoze coming out of the bathroom. With a cold face, he stood there expressionlessly and looked at her. Under his gaze, Shi Mengwan actually felt a sense of guilt. But it was only for a moment, and she quickly ignored it. Based on what? He could be engaged to another woman and be affectionate with her. She only had a suitor, and yet she felt guilty? She walked past Zhang Haoze and planned to continue packing her luggage, but her arm was grabbed by Zhang Haoze. Her body was turned around by him, and then she was pressed against the wall behind her. Zhang Haoze, she cried out. Zhang Haoze didn't give her a chance to speak again. He lowered his head to kiss her. It was a fierce and rough kiss. Shi Mengwan's lips were in pain from being crushed by him. She pushed him, but he didn't move at all. In a hurry, she placed her hand on his abdomen and wanted to attack his wound. But when she really touched that area, she put her hand down again. This pause undoubtedly gave Zhang Haoze another chance. He easily lifted her body and put her in a position where he was. Once again, he sealed her lips and nibbled on those two soft lips. Shi Mengwan was in pain and bit him instead. She used even more strength than Zhang Haoze. She bit down just like that. And she bit him so hard that his lips were bitten open just like that. The two of them tasted blood at the same time. The scene in front of them was so similar. Shi Mengwan thought of the last time she went on a blind date with Xiao Qi. And Zhang Haoze was also like this. She felt hatred in her heart, and pushed him hard without caring about anything else. Zhang Haoze's abdomen was pushed by her. He snorted in pain and took a step back. Shi Mengwan used this opportunity to retreat from his arms and stand on the other side. Her chest was heaving violently, and her lips were still stained with blood. Her hair was a little messy, and the front of her clothes was mostly crooked. She looked like she was in a sorry state, but there was also a kind of beauty in her. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes and subconsciously took a step forward. Shi Mengwan took a step back. She looked at the person in front of her with a burning gaze. Zhang Haoze, you can't be like this every time. Her heart was beating a little fast. She bit her lip, and the expression on her face was a little reproachful and bitter at the same time. I'm your girlfriend, right? If not, what right do you have to treat me like this? If you're your girlfriend, what right do you have to treat me like this? She closed her eyes and forced herself not to admit defeat in front of Zhang Haoze. Zhang Haoze, can you respect me? Or is it that in your heart, I'm just that kind of casual woman that you can do whatever you want? Zhang Haoze was a little stunned by her righteous words, but Shi Mengwan didn't want to care about him anymore. Zhang Haoze, I'm going to the venue prepared by the organizing committee this afternoon for the competition. I won't be here for the next few days. Help yourself. She turned around to pack her luggage, and stopped after taking 2 steps. Jean Hauser, I don't think you like me that much, right? It's just a possessive desire. If it's not me, it can be other women. To you there's no difference. To him, she was just an embellishment in his life. But to her he was everything. Not treating her feelings seriously meant that she was at a disadvantage in this relationship. Her silhouette looked lonely from behind, which was rare for her to be like that. No matter when, she always gave people the feeling that she was optimistic and cheerful. Jean Hauser stared at her back. Finally, when her hand touched the suitcase, he went forward and pulled her back into his arms. I didn't. Jean Hauser looked at her and instinctively wanted to explain. In his heart, he had never seen her as a casual woman. Nothing. I'm not, Jean Hauser said again. This time, he sounded even more serious than before. Shi Mengwan looked at him and inexplicably understood what he meant. He said that he wasn't being possessive. Are you trying to say that you like me? Shi Mengwan looked at him and returned to yesterday's question. Then do you think of me as your girlfriend? Jean Hauser looked at her face and nodded gently. His expression was extremely serious. Shi Mengwan looked at him. Then after we go back, can you make our relationship public? The problem was back to square one, but Shi Mengwan was especially concerned about this problem. If a man couldn't even let a woman stand by his side publicly and let everyone know that she was his girlfriend, what was the use of such a man? No. Jean Hauser refused without thinking. There were still many dangers around him. This injury was just a warning. Shi Mengwan suddenly smiled, as if she wasn't surprised by this answer at all. She pulled her hand out of Jean Hauser's hand bit by bit. Jean Hauser, you're really a bastard. Without looking at him, Shi Mengwan turned around and went to pack her luggage. There wasn't much to pack. They were outside anyway. In less than 20 minutes, she had packed everything. She pulled her suitcase and walked past Jean Hauser to look for Xiaoji and the others next door. Jean Hauser took a step to the side, wanting to block Shi Mengwan's path. Shi Mengwan looked at him coldly. Jean Hauser, this competition is very important. Please move aside. Wan. Jean Hauser didn't know what to say, but he couldn't let her know what had happened. Just now You don't have to explain. She looked at his conflicted expression and could roughly tell what he wanted to say. Unfortunately, she didn't want to hear it. The problem between us isn't about your actions just now. It's about your actions, your attitude towards me. I don't mean to look down on you, but now is really not the right time to make it public. Yes, it wasn't suitable, it just couldn't be. Then when was the right time? When could it be? Did he have an answer? I'm afraid not. She felt tired and didn't want to continue. Forget it. You'll never understand. She glanced at him. I'm going to the competition. Make yourself at home. Pulling her suitcase, Shi Mengwan left the room without looking back. This time, the organizing committee had really put in a lot of money. The venue for the finals was actually an ancient castle. The ancient castle was provided by the president of one of the sponsors this time. The first, second, and third designers also had the chance to work for this company. It had always been a world-class clothing brand. Such an opportunity was an excellent opportunity for all the participants. However, Shi Mengwan didn't have such plans. Her goal wasn't even to promote her studio. After all, if she wanted to talk about fame, she already had her own regular clients in Lin City. She came just to prove her ability, to prove that she could do it. The 10 points for the competition were arranged in the rooms on the first and second floors of the villa. For the next few days, except for special circumstances, all the participants were not allowed to leave. However, all the electronic equipment in the room was available. When Shi Mengwan entered the castle, she also received the theme of the finals, First Love. When she received this theme, Shi Mengwan felt Xiaoji and Tong Yin looking at her worriedly. Sister Shi. Xiaoji looked as if the sky had collapsed. You've never been in love before. Why did you choose such a theme? The sweet one from before was still a little better. Sweetness didn't just refer to love, family, friendship, the little warmth of society. In this life there would always be times when one would feel sweet, right? But this first love? Xiaoji's face was inexplicably full of worry. Shi Mengwan glanced at Xiaoji and gently knocked her on the head. Alright, think about how you can help me. Let's go. The room Shi Mingwan was assigned was on the second floor. There was a large balcony here. There was a sofa and a coffee table on the balcony. From the balcony, one could see the beautiful scenery in the distance, as well as the well-tended garden downstairs. Shi Mingwan couldn't help but sigh. This sponsor had really put in a lot of money. She sat on the sofa and looked at the beautiful scenery outside. She wasn't in a hurry to draw. First love? Her first love was Jean Hauser. But this first love, where did it begin? Now, or more than 10 years ago. She picked up the black tea, prepared by the organizing committee on the table. Shi Mingwan's heart flew back to the year when she was 12 years old. She and Jean Hauser depended on each other. When they met, it was when they were at their most miserable. She was actually a good girl. In the past, she, who had been strictly educated by Mother Shi, almost didn't dare to think that one day she would have a relationship with a boy who was like a hooligan. But now, not only did it happen, but it also happened so unexpectedly. They were each other's comfort and support. She believed that if it weren't for Jean Hauser, she might have admitted defeat long ago and gone home. She also knew that if it weren't for her dear brother at that time definitely wouldn't have taken good care of himself. He would have fought everywhere. And then when he was injured, he would only casually treat his wounds. She once thought that if her dear brother was willing, she could stay with him like that for the rest of her life. But her dear brother didn't give her that chance. The heavens didn't give her that chance. After going around in circles, they could be considered to have met now. But some things were already the same, but the people had changed. Shi Mingwan thought of a certain scene, and suddenly stood up. She walked to the table, and took out a pen and paper. When Xiao Ji and Tong Yin settled down and came in, they saw Shi Mingwan, who had already devoted herself to her work. She lowered her head, and drew very seriously. This room happened to face the west. The sunlight shone in from the huge balcony, dyeing Shi Mingwan's body with a layer of gold. Xiao Ji was shocked by such a scene. She couldn't help but take out her phone, and quietly take a few photos of Shi Mingwan. After taking the photos, she logged into Shi Mingwan's Weibo. Song Seeking Studio didn't set up a Weibo. However, Shi Mingwan had one. Most of the time, she managed her Weibo by herself. Occasionally, when the company had activities, she would ask Xiao Ji to post some activities. The picture attached to, during the finals, was the photo that Xiao Ji had just posted. She even made a 9-grid grid. After posting the photo, she glanced at Tong Yin. Tong Yin also had some ideas at this moment. He went into the room, and found a place to sit down. Then he took out his tools. Xiao Ji looked at the two of them, and turned around to be in charge of logistics. Time passed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. The main color Shi Mingwan used this time was green, a faint green. What was first love? It was youth, it was budding, that moment of heartbeat. It was like a tender bud that had just grown in spring, just emerging. She still remembered how she felt back then. When she left her dear brother, she felt uncomfortable, conflicted and painful. However, there was more joy, beauty, and a smile on her face when she recalled the past. This was what Shi Mingwan thought. She designed a total of 3 pieces of clothing. This was also the requirement of the competition. Every designer decided to submit at least 2 pieces of work. Shi Mingwan, on the other hand, drew 3 pieces in one go. The main piece was a dress. She used ogan yarn as the main fabric. It was a little hard, because they didn't understand love. The feelings of young men and women were a little stiff. However, there were also some lighter green leaves dotted among them. First love was beautiful, but there were too many things that could distract a person. First love couldn't be the only one. If the two of them wanted to be together, there were too many misgivings. If they broke up, there would be too many external reasons. Shi Mingwan was very satisfied with this set of works. She poured all of her feelings into it. After the finished product was made, Shi Mingwan submitted the work and the design drawings together. The rest was out of her control. All those who had submitted their works could play around the castle for the rest of the time. She told herself to relax, and played seriously with Tong Yin and Xiao Ji in the castle for a day. Finally, it was time to announce the results. The 10 people who participated in the finals were all experts. Shi Mengwan saw the other 9 works on the day of the announcement. She had to admit that the standards of the competition were indeed amazing. When the final rankings were announced, a pink dress designed by a local French designer won first place. The second place was an Italian designer, and the third place was a designer from Hong Kong. The colors used by the other party were quite bold. The design theme was like first love, brave and fearless. When Shi Mengwan saw those works, she knew that she probably wouldn't be in the top 3. After all, she had something on her mind and had too many worries. But to her surprise, she actually won the most special design award. She was 4th place. Shi Mengwan was satisfied. After the award ceremony, the other designers came to congratulate her. That night, the organizers and the organizing committee held a celebration dinner in the castle. All the designers who came to participate had to wear the themed clothes they had designed. Shi Mengwan put on the green dress. She looked like an elf in the forest. When she entered the banquet hall, she attracted a lot of attention. At this banquet, there were many local fashion brands from Paris. There were clothes, bags, jewelry, and perfume. It was Shi Mengwan's first time seeing so many legendary figures. She was fine. No matter what, she had been to the Su family and Hua Jingyao's company a few times. It was the first time Xiao Ji and Tong Yan had been to such a place. The 2 girls didn't know where to put their hands and feet. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but laugh. Just as she was about to comfort them, the person in charge of the sponsor, Dixon, waved at her from the other side and asked her to go over. Shi Mengwan had no choice but to ask Xiao Ji and Tong Yan to find a place to stay and not run around. She went in Dixon's direction. Sure. Shi Mengwan didn't come over with an English name. They all called her by her surname. Dixon looked at Shi Mengwan with a faint smile on his face. Chapter 679. Was he also from China? Shi Mengwan was a little interested. Up until now, she was the only one from the mainland who had participated in the competition. She had chatted with the third-place Hong Kong beauty for a long time, and the other party kept asking her to go to Hong Kong to play. She was already very happy to be able to meet a Chinese person. But there was actually a Chinese person now? Was it also a manufacturer from China? Or as he spoke, Dixon took half a step to the side and looked behind him. Jean, let me introduce you. This is Miss Shi, also from Lin City. Her work this time is very good. It's very spiritual. Sure, this is Jean. He's also from Lin City, China. In your words, he's a fellow villager. Dixon smiled brightly, but Shi Mengwan's expression instantly stiffened. Shi Mengwan looked at John Hausa, who suddenly appeared in front of her. For a moment, she thought there was something wrong with her eyes. Why was he here? Seeing that she didn't say anything, Dixon thought that she didn't know Jean Hausa's identity. So he explained further. Sure, although Jean is from China, he also has his own business in France, including some fashion brands. Dixon said 2 names, and Shi Mengwan looked at John Hausa in surprise. He was wearing a white suit with a dark red pattern stitched from the collar to the shoulders. The close-fitting tailoring, and such a design made him look a little more noble. She could even feel Jean Hausa's gaze landing on him when he stood up. However, she wasn't just paying attention to Jean Hausa's current appearance. Her mind was filled with the 2 names that Dixon had mentioned. They were 2 new fashion brands. Although the design was considered niche, it was already quite well known in the country, and in Europe and the United States. Were these 2 clothing brands Jean Hausa's business? She lowered her eyes and thought of something from a long time ago. It was not long after she went to school. It was the day after she found out that her dear brother would still fight with others outside and get injured. She suddenly had an inspiration and drew a design that was still considered immature at that time. At that time, she took the design and ran to show it to Qiao Zhe. The young man looked at her with gentleness in his eyes. Dear brother, what do you think of this dress? Not bad. It's very beautiful. The youth wasn't stingy with his compliments. If Wanwan wore it, it would be even more beautiful. Really? Big brother, you're not lying to me, right? Nope. I'm serious. As the young man spoke, he pulled her to his side and sat her down. His gaze fell on the painting in the young lady's hand, but he put his arm around her shoulder and pulled her closer to him. He liked her being close to him, and he liked being close to her. Shi Mengwan took the opportunity to lean on his shoulder and also look at the design drawing. Finally, she turned to look at the young man. Big brother, can you help me in the future? Help you? Yeah, I'll draw and design clothes and you'll make clothes. You'll open a big factory and sell the clothes I designed to more people. The young man looked into her eyes. He didn't think that it would be a difficult goal for them to achieve now. Instead, he nodded lightly and said, all right. What Shi Mengwan didn't say was that at that time, dear brother would have something to do and wouldn't fight outside anymore. She knew that even though he was very good at fighting and rarely got hurt, he was still very good at fighting. However, she was still very worried about him and didn't want him to be like that in the future. Big brother. In the future, I will definitely draw a lot of beautiful pictures. At that time, there will definitely be a lot of people who will buy the clothes I design. At that time, you must help me, okay? Okay. Dear brother. Yes. In the future, when we earn money, we can move to a big house, and we can travel around the world. We don't have to stay here anymore. At that time, can you stop fighting with others? Okay. The young man pressed her body into his arms. He used a little too much strength. He smelled the young lady's scent on her body, and his eyes were firm. Dear brother, every time you go out, I'm very worried about you. I don't like you fighting with others. Next time you really don't fight with others, okay? Okay. Dear brother, you're so nice. The young lady smiled happily. The young man looked at the self-destruction on her face and forced himself to calm down. Then, he looked at her and said very firmly, I don't fight with others. When you grow up and become a fashion designer, I'll open a clothing company. I'll specialize in selling clothes designed by you. Okay. Then I'll wait for you. The young lady smiled brightly. At that moment, the dilapidated bungalow seemed to have welcomed a sky full of stars. Dixon's voice brought her back to her senses. Sorry, I was a little distracted. Shi Mengwan looked at that handsome face and forced herself to look away. Did John Hauser create those two clothing brands for her? Could she think like that? But looking at him, she couldn't link these two things together at all. Dixon acted as if he didn't notice the loss of composure on her face, and continued to talk about John Hauser's identity in high spirits. These are all brands under Jean's banner. You're all from China. I think you two should have something to talk about. After Dixon finished speaking, someone happened to be looking for her. She excused herself to the two of them and left first. Only Jean Hauser and Shi Mengwan were left standing there. Shi Mengwan stood still. She thought about what Dixon said just now. Jean Hauser actually had a business in France? Didn't he run a technology company? What had he been doing outside all these years? What had he experienced? She couldn't help but feel a trace of curiosity. However, she forced herself to look away and nod at John Hauser. Congratulations. John Hauser stood beside her. A waiter happened to pass by. He picked up 2 glasses of champagne from the tray and placed one of them in Shi Mengwan's hand. Shi Mengwan looked at him for a while and finally reached out to take it. There's nothing to congratulate. She didn't enter the top 3 again. Jean Hauser's gaze fell on her. The extremely fresh green color contrasted with her snow-white skin. The top was a one-shoulder design that was tailored to fit her body. A leaf just extended to her shoulder, and the bottom was layered with light muslin. Jean Hauser gently clinked his glass with hers. In my heart, you're number 1. Shi Mengwan was stunned by his words. Her hand that was holding the glass stopped there, and she just looked at him. Realizing that she was affected by him again, Shi Mengwan turned her face away. She didn't let herself sink any further. She casually took a sip of champagne. Standing next to Jean Hauser made her feel uncomfortable. She put the glass aside and turned around to leave. However, Jean Hauser put down the glass and held her hand. Shi Mengwan looked at that hand, and then at the other people in the banquet hall. She lowered her voice and was a little anxious. Let go. The music in the hall changed at this moment. Jean Hauser looked at Shi Mengwan and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mengwan understood what he meant and took a step back. You Let's go. Dance with me. As Jean Hauser spoke, he held her hand and led her to the dance floor in the middle of the hall. Shi Mengwan wanted to retreat, but his hand had already wrapped around her waist. He led her around the edge of the dance floor. Bit by bit, they slid into the middle of the dance floor. Being led by him like this, even if Shi Mengwan didn't want to, she could only dance and spin with his steps. After dancing a few steps, she realized that Jean Hauser's dancing skills were pretty good. She was a little surprised. Her dancing skills weren't considered good. After all, she wasn't a rich young lady. There weren't many opportunities for her to attend banquets. Now that Jean Hauser was leading her, she looked at Jean Hauser in front of her. There were more and more secrets about him that she couldn't figure out and couldn't see through. However, not only could she not let go of these secrets, but she also wanted to get closer and know more. Shi Mengwan's footsteps turned in a circle. This kind of thinking was very dangerous. She had to suppress it. Jean Hauser was very dangerous. She had to stay away. Her rationality kept reminding her. But when she looked at Jean Hauser's deep eyes, she could only dance with his footsteps. You're very beautiful today. Jean Hauser moved his face closer to Shi Mengwan's ear. He spoke in a soft voice, and the hot air he blew out was right next to her ear. Her ears turned red and she subconsciously shrank her neck. She wanted to avoid him, but she and Jean Hauser were already dancing. Where could she hide? Jean Hauser's hand around her waist slightly tightened, and she moved closer to him instead. Shi Mengwan had already made up her mind to stay away from him. His actions made her want to escape from his arms. Have you ever thought about cooperating with these big European and American brands? Promote your designs all over the world. The sudden voice above her head stunned Shi Mengwan. She looked up at him with a hint of shock in her eyes. Jean Hauser, you? Have you never thought about it? Jean Hauser looked at her and said indifferently, if you want, whether it's Dixon or any other company, you can think about it. The information revealed by these words was too much. Shi Mengwan furrowed her brows. She looked up at Jean Hauser's face, as if it was the first time she had met him. Jean Hauser, who exactly are you? Dear brother was 15 when he met her, and he was 16 when they separated. The two of them had been separated for 12 years. What exactly had Jean Hauser done in the past 12 years? What had he experienced? Was he really her dear brother? With his situation back then, it was really a little scary for him to have achieved what he had today in 12 years. Putting aside the two clothing brands that Dixon had mentioned just now, it was definitely not easy to be able to reach such a level abroad. After she met Xiao Qi, she specially went to investigate the technology company that she had mentioned. She also investigated Jean Hauser. Although their company's website didn't have a photo of Jean Hauser, the introduction on it was very clear. The technology company that Xiao Qi was talking about was founded by Jean Hauser. Now its market value was countless times higher than when it was founded. With such ability and such methods, she thought of the young man who only knew how to fight back then. She really couldn't connect the person in front of her with that young man. Jean Hauser looked into her eyes and tilted his head slightly. A kiss fell on her lips just like that. His voice was very soft. I'm your man. Shi Mengwan's face suddenly turned red. She wanted to push Jean Hauser away, but she realized that he had brought her to the edge of the dance floor. The music changed at this moment. Jean Hauser took the opportunity to let go of her hand and brought her to the corner of the hall. As one of the invited guests, Jean Hauser also had a room in the castle. He brought Shi Mengwan upstairs. Shi Mengwan tried to break free from his hand a few times, but she didn't get what she wanted. When she went up to the second floor, she was surprised to find that Jean Hauser's room was actually arranged next to hers. Her body was brought in by him, and her hand grabbed the door handle. Jean Hauser, don't do anything rash. There were still so many guests downstairs, and Dixon was also there. Could it be that he was thinking? Jean Hauser looked at the resistance on her face and easily carried her body. With a tap of his toes, the door was closed. He pushed her against the door and gently caressed her collarbone with his big hand. I wanted to do that just now. As he spoke, he lowered his head and planted a kiss on the spot where his fingertips touched. Jean Hauser barely managed to retain some rationality. He didn't tear her dress apart. But the slow process of taking it off made Shermung-won's face turn red. Her body had already become unlike her own. She could only follow his movements to climb up or down. He was like a sharp sword, avoiding her, and she was the sea, containing his every attack. The moment he got off her, he didn't let go of her. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. Shermung-won couldn't move. She looked at the ceiling above her head, not quite understanding how things had turned out like this. She turned to look at him, and he was also looking at her. Shermung-won felt a little uncomfortable under his overly passionate gaze. When she shifted her gaze away, she saw his bare upper body. There was a scar on his abdomen, and it could be seen very clearly. This was the wound from a few days ago. The stitches had been removed, but the scar was still there. Previously, because of his engagement with Chen Feifei, Shermung-won had always forced herself not to care about him, and not to care about him. Now that she saw this wound, she couldn't help but reach out and caress it. How did you get it? It was so long, and she didn't know if it was deep. It must have been very painful at that time, right? Are you concerned about me? Zhang Hao's voice sounded like there was a hint of a smile in it. No. Shermung-won wanted to retract her hand, but Zhang Hao grabbed her hand and pressed it against the wound. She couldn't pull her hand back, so he grabbed it and caressed it bit by bit along the lines of the wound. The feeling there wasn't smooth. After Shermung-won felt it from beginning to end, she suddenly retracted her hand. She flipped over and turned around. There was no way she wouldn't look at him. Zhang Hao didn't understand what was wrong with her. He wanted to turn her body right, but she stubbornly refused. He was very strong, but in the end, she was turned around by him. Only then did he realize that her eyes were red, and there was a faint mist in them. Wan. Shermung-won lowered her head and didn't look at him. She remembered that the young man had promised her that he wouldn't fight with anyone again. But whether it was when she met him in the alley of the bungalow district or this time, in short, he went back on his word. He forgot his promise, just like how he forgot that he had promised himself that he would take care of her and protect her for the rest of her life. Wan. Zhang Hao called her again. Compared to the rudeness and fierceness he had when he was entangled with her on the bed just now, the way he called her name was extremely gentle. Shermung-won had the urge to cry, but she didn't want him to see her like this. She pushed him and got up to leave. However, she forgot that her body was still weak from the strenuous exercise. Just as she wanted to sit up, she fell back again. This time, she happened to fall into his arms. He just wanted to stop her, so her chin hit the top of his head. Shermung-won was in pain. The tears that she had been holding back just now fell uncontrollably. Her tears stimulated Zhang Hao. He got up and wrapped her in his arms. Wan. Shermung-won rarely felt so vulnerable. Now, she suddenly wanted to cry and felt uncomfortable. The emotions that she had been suppressing since her reunion with Zhang Hao seemed to finally be able to be vented. She raised her hand and suddenly punched Zhang Hao's chest. Bastard, you bastard. As she spoke, she punched him a few more times. Her strength was nothing more than scratching an itch to him. Zhang Hao didn't stop her and let her punch him. Shermung-won punched him many times until her hands were out of strength. She finally stopped and leaned her face against Zhang Hao. Her voice was very soft. Zhang Hao, you're a bastard. He only knew how to bully her. He had always been like this. Zhang Hao, you're a liar. He had clearly promised her something, but he couldn't do anything. If he wasn't a liar, then what was he? Zhang Hao, you're still a thief. He stole her heart, but he didn't want to take responsibility. He was really a thief. You bastard, you liar, you thief. Shermung-won wouldn't scold him anymore. She only said these 3 words back and forth. In the end, she was tired of fighting and scolding. In addition, she had been mentally and physically exhausted for the finals these few days. By the time Zhang Hao realized it, she had already closed her eyes and fell asleep on his chest. Even though she was asleep, her lips still seemed to be moving. He got closer and listened carefully. He heard the word bastard. Zhang Hao gently picked her up and laid her flat on the bed. He looked at her and gently caressed her cheek. There were still traces of tears there. He wiped away those tears one by one. Finally, he planted a kiss on her forehead. He wanted to lie down with her. Ever since Shermung-won left that day, He hadn't been idle for the past few days. He had a lot of things to do. But now, he just wanted to hug this woman and sleep for a while. However, as soon as he lay down, his phone rang. Before waking Shi Mingwan up, Zhang Haoze quickly turned off the sound of his phone. Then he got up and went to the bathroom to answer the phone. The news from the other side made his expression solemn. He seemed to have thought of something and spoke extremely calmly. "I'll be right back. Prepare the plane." Walking out of the bathroom, Shi Mingwan was sleeping soundly. Zhang Haoze put on his clothes and stared at her sleeping face by the bed for a long time. Finally, he turned around and left resolutely. After Shi Mingwan returned from France, the workload of the studio increased a lot. Although she didn't get the top 3, the most special design award, and the 4th place in the competition were still very good. Especially the Weibo post that Xiao Ji posted on her phone that day. She was called the most beautiful female designer. Now, in addition to the high order, many clothing companies came to ask her if she was interested in mass production. Shi Mingwan was too busy, so she rejected them for the time being. Most importantly, she remembered what Zhang Haoze said that day. Speaking of Zhang Haoze, it wasn't strange that she didn't see Zhang Haoze when she woke up the next day. He seemed to have always been like this. He came and went as he pleased. What was she to him? Did they break up like this? She didn't go back to her room for the whole night, and her phone was left with Xiao Ji. The next day, Xiao Ji and Tong Yin were looking for her like crazy. Shi Mingwan could only say that she was drunk yesterday and found a room to sleep. If it weren't for the fact that this was Dixon's castle, Xiao Ji and Tong Yin wouldn't have believed her so easily. After returning to Lin City, Shi Mingwan had been paying attention to the news of the Chen family in Lin City. She found that other than the news of the engagement last time, there was no other news. Shi Mingwan couldn't tell what she felt. She really wanted to look for Zhang Haoze, but she also wanted to use this opportunity to break it off. Soon, she wasn't in the mood to worry about Zhang Haoze. When Su Qingseng went to be an exchange doctor, there was an earthquake. Then, Su Qingseng lost contact. Shi Mingwan couldn't sit still anymore. She went to the Su family to look for Li Qianxue. It was only after she went to Rong City that she found out that Su Qingseng wasn't Xiang Saiping's daughter, but Li Qianxue's daughter. She really couldn't have imagined such a thing. Now that Su Qingseng was in trouble, she definitely couldn't go to the disaster area. But the Su family would have a way, right? Li Qianxue was also worried, but she received a call from Hu Jinyao. Hu Jinyao comforted her and said that he had already brought supplies to the disaster area and told her not to worry. No matter how anxious she was now, she knew that with her physical and mental state, going to the disaster area would only cause more trouble. No matter how worried she was, she could only trust Hu Jinyao now. Shi Mingwan couldn't be as calm as Li Qianxue. She and Su Qingseng had known each other for so many years. To her, Su Qingseng was like a sister. She also wanted to go to the disaster area to look for Su Qingseng. However, not everyone could go to the disaster area now. If Hu Jinyao hadn't donated a large amount of supplies and followed them to the disaster area, it wouldn't have been so easy for him. She thought about it, but she didn't know how to go to the disaster area and participate in the search for Su Qingseng. Finally, she thought of Zhang Haoze. She took out her phone and called Zhang Haoze, but no one answered. After staring at the phone for a long time, she decided to make a trip herself. The car stopped downstairs of the technology company where Zhang Haoze was. Shi Mingwan wasn't sure if she could find him if she went upstairs. Maybe he wasn't in the company? She wanted to leave, but her worry for Su Qingseng overwhelmed everything else. After entering the building, she was in no mood to appreciate the ultramodern decoration and some equipment that could only be seen in movies. She walked directly to the front desk and told the front desk that she was looking for Zhang Haoze. "You're looking for President Zhang? I'm sorry. If you don't have an appointment, we can't let you go up." "Can you ask?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. I really can't see President Zhang without an appointment." Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and was still thinking about how to go up and see Zhang Haoze. She heard someone calling her. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.